In this video, we're going to be breaking down the most disturbing Rick and Morty theories, so let's get started with your first one. Rick Sanchez might not be the original grandfather that Beth grew up with. The Rick we follow could be a replacement who already swapped into this family after destroying his own timeline years ago. The Smith family lives their normal lives until Morty asks Rick for a love potion to win over Jessica. Rick creates a serum based on Vole DNA that makes Jessica fall in love with Morty forever. But there's a problem. Jessica has the flu, and the serum piggybacks on the virus. What starts as Morty's romantic fantasy quickly turns into a nightmare. The love potion spreads through the entire school dance when Jessica sneezes, infecting everyone with an obsessive desire for Morty. Rick tries to fix things with an antidote using praying mantis DNA, but this makes everything worse. Now everyone wants to mate with Morty and eat him afterward. Rick's third attempt involves mixing DNA from koalas, rattlesnakes, chimpanzees, cactus, sharks, golden retrievers, and dinosaurs. When Morty releases this final serum, it transforms the entire human population into grotesque flesh monsters that Rick calls Cronenbergs. The most revealing moment comes at the end. Rick's solution is simple. Find a dimension where they fixed everything but died shortly after. They portal into a reality where their alternate selves just got killed by an exploding device. Rick and Morty bury their own corpses in the backyard and take over these lives. Here's what's suspicious about Rick's behavior during this traumatic experience. Morty is completely horrified, crying and freaking out about seeing his own dead body. But Rick stays completely calm and practical. He gives Morty clear instructions about grabbing the bodies and acts like this is just another Tuesday. Think about how weird that is. You're looking at your own mangled corpse, burnt and bloody from an explosion. Most people would lose their minds. Even Rick should show some reaction to seeing himself dead. But he doesn't even flinch. He just starts explaining reality theory and tells Morty to grab his dead body like they're moving furniture. Rick even mentions they can only do this 3 or 4 more times, tops. This suggests he's counting previous dimension swaps, not just planning for future ones. Why would Rick already know the exact limit unless he's used up some of these chances already? He talks about it like he's checking his remaining lives in a video game. The way Rick handles the burial is the biggest clue. Most people would be disturbed by burying their own corpse, but Rick treats it like routine maintenance. He's not shocked, scared, or even slightly bothered. This level of emotional detachment suggests he's done this before, multiple times. When Morty asks about the reality they left behind, Rick dismisses it completely. He tells Morty not to think about it and compares it to Hitler curing cancer. Just another random reality that doesn't matter. This casual attitude toward abandoning entire families and timelines seems practiced. He's got his speech ready. Look at how Rick talks throughout the episode. When things start going wrong, he doesn't panic like someone experiencing this for the first time. Instead, he immediately starts thinking about solutions and backup plans. He knows about infinite realities and has portal technology ready. The episode ends with the original Smith family actually being happier without Rick and Morty. Beth and Jerry admit they don't miss them at all and have found peace in their Cronenberg apocalypse world. Meanwhile, Summer entertains herself with makeshift TV shows. They've adapted and moved on surprisingly well. This happiness reveals something important. Maybe this family is better off without Rick because the Rick they knew was already a replacement. The original Rick might have been genuinely caring, but our Rick is an emotionally distant substitute who's been through this trauma multiple times. Think about Rick's personality in general. He's cold, detached, and treats his family like they're replaceable. That's exactly how someone would act if they'd already replaced families before. Every time Rick destroys a reality, he becomes more detached and less connected to the people around him. The fact that Rick immediately knew about infinite realities and had a backup plan ready suggests this wasn't his first timeline disaster. He knew exactly what to do because he's abandoned families before. He had the portal gun, the knowledge, and most importantly, the emotional detachment to actually go through with it. There's also Rick's comment about how if he hadn't screwed up so much, they'd be the dead versions. He says, "You're welcome," like this is somehow a favor to Morty. That's a twisted way to look at destroying an entire timeline and abandoning your family. Unless you've already abandoned families before and convinced yourself it's no big deal. Rick's relationship with Beth also makes more sense through this lens. She constantly seeks his approval but never quite gets the connection she wants. Maybe that's because the Rick she grew up with was different. The real Rick might have been warmer, more present. Our Rick is just going through the motions of being a father figure. Even the way Rick talks about science supports this theory. He treats every mistake as just another experiment, every disaster as just data. That's how someone reacts when they've already learned that nothing really matters, because there's always another dimension to escape to. The most disturbing part is that Rick probably tells himself this makes him smarter than everyone else. He's figured out the multiverse cheat code. But really, He's just a guy who's been running from his mistakes for so long that he's forgotten how to actually care about the people around him. Rick's calmness about replacing his family shows he's done it before, leading into Evil Morty, who may have been his very first abandoned Morty. Evil Morty might be the original Morty that our Rick C-137 adventured with before he came to live with the Smith family we know. This would explain Evil Morty's incredible knowledge of Rick's technology and his deep personal hatred for everything Rick represents. The episode reveals that Rick C-137 built the Citadel and worked with other Ricks before settling down with our current family. What we don't know is what happened during those years when Rick was hunting down Rick Prime, the Rick who killed his original wife, Diane, and daughter Beth. Rick spent decades traveling between dimensions, killing other Ricks, and eventually helped create the Citadel of Ricks. During this dark period of Rick's life, he would have needed a Morty companion to hide his brainwaves from other Ricks. The show establishes that Ricks need Mortys as camouflage, so Rick C-137 must have had a Morty during his years of Rick hunting. But here's the thing, we never see what happened to that first Morty. The most telling moment comes when Evil Morty reveals the full scope of how the Citadel operates. He shows Morty the horrific truth about Morty farms, cloning operations, and how Mortys are treated as disposable commodities. But Evil Morty doesn't just know about these operations, he understands them on a technical level that suggests first-hand experience with Rick's darkest methods. Evil Morty's plan to destroy the central finite curve requires intimate knowledge of Rick's technology and psychology. He successfully hacks Rick's portal gun, completes Rick's brain scan from years ago, and manipulates the entire Citadel infrastructure. This level of expertise suggests he learned directly from Rick C-137 himself during Rick's most brutal and unhinged period. Think about Evil Morty's behavior throughout the episode. He's specifically targeting the entire system that Rick C-137 helped create. His destruction of the Citadel feels personal, like he's dismantling something that he watched Rick build. When he tells Morty, "Now you're evil, Morty, too," he's speaking from experience about what it's like to be disillusioned by Rick. The episode also mentions that Rick has memories of baby Morty from close Rick counters of the Rick kind, even though Rick supposedly only moved in when Morty was already a teenager. This memory inconsistency could be explained if Rick had an earlier Morty relationship that he's trying to forget or suppress. Evil Morty's escape from the central finite curve represents the ultimate rejection of everything Rick stands for. But his knowledge of how to break free suggests he learned about the curve's construction from someone who was there when it was built. Rick C-137 was involved in creating the Citadel and presumably the curve itself. The most disturbing aspect is how Evil Morty talks about being bred for forgiveness and loyalty to Rick. He understands the psychological manipulation because he lived through it with the most dangerous Rick of all. While our current Morty still believes in Rick despite everything, Evil Morty represents what happens when a Morty finally sees through all of Rick's lies and manipulation. Evil Morty's golden portal gun at the end symbolizes his complete independence from Rick's technology and influence. But the fact that he can create this advanced technology suggests he was taught by a Rick who understood these systems better than anyone else. Rick C-137's expertise in portal technology and dimensional theory would have been the perfect training ground for someone planning to break free from the entire Rick-dominated multiverse. This theory explains why Evil Morty is so specifically focused on escaping Rick rather than just defeating him. He's not trying to beat Rick at his own game. He's trying to get away from the game entirely. That kind of exhaustion and disillusionment comes from prolonged exposure to Rick's worst behaviors, not just brief encounters. The saddest part is that Rick probably abandoned his first Morty when he decided to settle down with the Smith family. Evil Morty's entire crusade might stem from being discarded by Rick after years of helping him hunt down and kill other versions of himself. No wonder he calls Rick an infinite smear of one shitty old man. Look at how Evil Morty talks about Rick's trauma. He says all Ricks use their pain to justify terrible things. That sounds like someone who watched Rick use his dead wife's story to rationalize years of murder and mayhem. Evil Morty would have been there for Rick's darkest moments, watching him spiral deeper into violence and nihilism. The timeline makes sense too. Rick C-137 spent years hunting Rick Prime before giving up and settling with our Beth's family. During that time, he would have needed a Morty constantly by his side. What happened when Rick decided to stop his revenge quest? He probably just ditched his old Morty and started fresh with a new family. Think about how Evil Morty operates during the Citadel takeover. He doesn't just want to destroy the place, he wants to expose its horrors to everyone. He forces our Morty to see the truth about Morty factories and cloning operations. This feels like someone who was traumatized by these systems and wants others to understand the full scope of Rick's cruelty. Evil Morty's hatred runs so deep that he's willing to kill thousands of Ricks and Mortys just to escape. That level of rage doesn't come from random encounters with Rick behavior. It comes from being personally betrayed and abandoned by someone you trusted completely. The way evil Morty manipulates the situation also shows Rick-level strategic thinking. He plays on our Rick's ego, uses emotional manipulation on our Morty, and executes a plan that requires years of preparation. Where would he learn those skills except from the smartest Rick in the universe? When evil Morty says, "Sooner or later, we all are evil," he's talking about the inevitable corruption that comes from spending too much time with Rick. Our current Morty is just starting to see Rick's true nature, but evil Morty has been through the complete cycle of worship, disillusionment, and finally hatred. The golden portal gun represents more than just independence. It's evil Morty proving he's surpassed his former teacher. He took everything Rick taught him and used it to break free from Rick's control entirely. The student became the master and then destroyed the entire school system. Evil Morty's escape to the greater multiverse is the ultimate fuck you to Rick C-137 specifically. He's dismantling Rick's entire power structure on his way out. That's personal revenge, not just philosophical disagreement. Evil Morty's rage makes sense if he was Rick's very first discarded sidekick. And this idea becomes even darker when you realize our Morty might not be Rick's first either. If you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to our channel. Our Morty might not be the first Morty that Rick C-137 has worked with. The Citadel's casual system of Morty replacement vouchers suggests that Rick's regularly burn through sidekicks, and Rick's behavior hints at experience with disposable partnerships. The episode reveals a disturbing infrastructure around Morty replacement. When the Council of Ricks apologizes to Rick, they offer him a voucher for a free replacement Morty in case his current one gets damaged or killed. This is shown as a standard operating procedure. The casual way they mention it suggests this happens all the time. Think about how weird that is. They have an entire system ready to go for replacing Mortys. Like they've got forms printed up and everything. You don't build that kind of bureaucracy unless there's serious demand for it. The Citadel itself operates like a mall for Mortys. There are salespeople hawking Morty dazzlers and insurance policies. One guy specifically mentions that hundreds of Mortys are injured every year. This whole economy exists because Ricks go through Mortys like they're buying groceries. Most telling is Rick's reaction when offered that replacement voucher. He initially refuses it, calling it bad timing, but then quietly pockets it anyway when nobody's looking. Dude knows he might need it someday. Someone who's never lost a Morty wouldn't instinctively grab that thing. Throughout the episode, Rick treats Morty exactly like disposable equipment. He openly calls Morty a human cloaking device and explains that Mortys exist to cancel out Rick's genius brainwaves. When Morty gets upset about being treated like a tool, Rick doesn't even try to deny it. He just doubles down and calls Morty a perfect, impenetrable suit of human armor. Rick's knowledge about Morty psychology feels way too detailed for someone on his first rodeo. He knows exactly how Morty brainwaves work, how to push his buttons, and how to keep him loyal despite constant abuse. That kind of expertise comes from lots of practice with different test subjects. The episode's big reveal shows evil Rick collecting Mortys for this massive torture matrix. But here's what's really messed up. Rick C-137 looks at this setup, and his first reaction is technical criticism. He complains about the barbaric overkill and suggests you could get the same results with 5 Mortys and a jumper cable. That's not how someone reacts when seeing Morty torture for the first time. When Rick admits he fiddled with a concept like this once, Morty just stares at him in complete horror. Rick quickly tries to cover with "on paper," but his knowledge seems way too specific for just theory. He understands the practical stuff because he's actually considered using Mortys this way before. The other Ricks treat Morty replacement like it's completely normal business. They talk about shipping damaged Mortys back to their families and getting new ones like they're discussing warranty repairs. The whole Rick community has normalized treating Mortys as consumable resources. Rick's warning at the end is super ominous too. He tells Morty that a cocky Morty could lead to some big problems and be a real bad thing for everybody. When Morty asks what he means, Rick says he'll explain when he's older. This sounds like Rick has dealt with rebellious Mortys before and knows exactly how those situations end up playing out. The way Rick manipulates Morty shows serious expertise. He knows exactly how to hurt Morty's feelings, then build him back up with just enough validation to keep him hooked. When Rick calls Morty the Mortiest Morty, it sounds like a compliment, but it's actually reinforcing Morty's role as the perfect submissive sidekick. Rick's emotional detachment is also telling. When Morty gets captured, Rick doesn't freak out like someone losing their first partner. He stays focused on the mission and treats Morty's rescue like a tactical problem to solve. Someone dealing with their first Morty kidnapping would be way more emotionally invested. The episode establishes there are thousands of Rick and Morty pairs across dimensions. But it also shows that Ricks regularly lose their Mortys to violence, accidents, or rebellion. The math doesn't add up unless Ricks are cycling through multiple Mortys during their careers. Most importantly, Rick's relationship with Morty lacks any learning curve. Rick already knows all of Morty's weak spots and exactly how to exploit them. He understands Morty's hero complex and uses it to manipulate him into dangerous situations. The replacement voucher system exists because there's actual demand for it. The Citadel wouldn't maintain an entire Morty replacement infrastructure unless Ricks were regularly coming in asking for new ones. Rick C. 137 might be on his third or fourth Morty by now, and nobody would ever know. Look at how Rick has perfected the art of Morty management. He gives just enough affection to keep Morty loyal, but never enough to make him feel actually valued. Rick has learned from previous Mortys exactly how to maintain that perfect balance of abuse and reward. It's like he's running a psychological experiment and has finally figured out the optimal settings. When Rick tells Morty he's the Rickest Rick with the Mortiest Morty, he's not celebrating some unique bond. He's describing a successful product match. Rick has finally found his ideal disposable sidekick, and he plans to use that relationship until it completely breaks down. The really dark part is how good Rick has gotten at this. Previous Mortys probably figured out they were being used and either rebelled or ran away. But our Morty is so perfectly manipulated that he actually feels special about being the Mortiest Morty. Rick has weaponized Morty's need for approval and turned it into the ultimate control mechanism. Think about Evil Morty's whole deal too. That guy clearly figured out he was disposable and decided to burn down the entire system. What if Evil Morty was actually Rick C. 137's first Morty, and everything we're seeing is the result of Rick's early, sloppier attempts at Morty management? The voucher Rick pockets at the end is basically a receipt for future emotional damage. He's already planning for the day when our Morty either dies or gets too rebellious to control. When that happens, Rick will just cash in his voucher, get a fresh Morty, and start the whole cycle over again. The saddest thing is that Morty thinks he's special, but he's actually just the latest model in Rick's long line of disposable sidekicks. Rick has finally perfected his technique, and Morty is too manipulated to even realize he's trapped in a system designed to use him up and throw him away. Rick's history of cycling through Mortys like disposable tools makes the next step even darker, because our Morty himself might not even be the real one but a clone who wouldn't know the difference. The Morty we've been watching might not be the original Morty from Dimension C-131. He could be a clone or decoy that replaced the real Morty at some point. And the really messed up part is that he'd have no clue. Mortyplicity shows us just how screwed up this whole decoy situation really is. These copies are completely convinced they're real, until they find proof otherwise. They've got all the same memories, feelings, everything. One decoy literally finds a brain chip that says, "You're a decoy," and he looks genuinely heartbroken about it. Rick's decoy tech is so good that it creates people who are psychologically identical to the originals. When Summer asks if the decoys know they're fake, Rick says, "They wouldn't be very good decoys if they did." The whole point is making them believe they're real, with total conviction. Every family in the episode freaks out about whether they're real or fake. Rick's stupid barcode test turns out to be a prank, but it shows how desperate everyone is to prove they're authentic. The episode makes it super clear there's basically no way to tell the difference. Here's what makes this theory really disturbing. Rick started making decoys after that trouble with Space Beth. But the Space Beth thing happened because Rick couldn't tell if his Beth was real or a clone. If Rick can't tell his own clones apart from originals, how the hell would Morty know if he got replaced? The episode reveals that decoys can make their own decoys, creating this endless chain of copies. Rick finds decoy-making equipment in one of his decoy houses and realizes everything's gone completely off the rails. If decoys are making decoys, then our Rick might not even know his Morty is like 3 generations removed from the original. Think about how Rick treats Morty throughout the whole series. He constantly says Morty's replaceable and expendable. In close Rick counters of the Rick kind, Rick just casually pockets that replacement Morty voucher. Someone who's already working with a replacement wouldn't be emotionally attached to keeping that specific copy around. Rick's whole casual attitude toward clone replacement makes way more sense if he's already done it before. When he explains the decoys to his family, he's totally matter-of-fact about their existence. No guilt, no concern about creating living beings who think they're real. That's how someone acts when they've normalized this process. The episode shows us how clone degradation works too. Decoys get weird the further down the line you go. Scarecrow Rick knows he's fake because he's so poorly made, but the earlier versions are basically indistinguishable from originals. If our Morty is like a second or third generation replacement, he'd never know. Look at Morty's character development throughout the show. He's gotten more confident, more capable, more willing to fight back against Rick. What if that's not actually character growth, but Rick fine-tuning his Morty replacements? Each new version could be slightly improved, more optimized for what Rick needs. Rick's knowledge of Morty psychology is weirdly detailed. He knows exactly how to push Morty's buttons and predict his reactions. That kind of expertise could come from running multiple versions of the same person and learning what works best with each iteration. The most chilling part is the episode's ending. After all that chaos and death, Rick just casually mentions, "Someone killed a decoy family," like it's no big deal. He's completely desensitized to the idea of his family dying because he knows they're replaceable. When Rick explains decoys to his family, he says they're exactly like us, with a few tweaks and a backdoor shutdown. Those tweaks could include making Morty more obedient, more useful, or more loyal than the original version. Rick might have been slowly perfecting his ideal Morty through successive replacements. The episode also shows that none of the decoy Ricks have portal guns. Only the real Rick has that technology. But what if our Rick is actually a decoy who doesn't realize it? What if there's an even more real Rick somewhere orchestrating everything from behind the scenes? Morty's fear of being fake gets treated like a joke, but it's actually the most rational response to their situation. Summer keeps insisting they're decoys, and honestly, she's right to be suspicious. In a world where perfect copies exist, being paranoid about authenticity is the only sane reaction. The episode shows families desperately trying to prove they're real, but every test can be faked. Bleeding doesn't prove you're real, because decoys bleed. Memories don't prove anything because decoys have identical memories. Even finding decoy-making equipment doesn't prove you're original because decoys make their own decoys. Rick's password system for controlling decoys proves he has backdoor access to their minds. But what if someone else has backdoor access to Rick's mind? What if our entire family is several generations of copies, all controlled by some higher authority they can't even perceive? The scariest possibility is that Morty has been replaced multiple times throughout the series, and we've been watching different versions without realizing it. Every time Morty dies in an adventure, Rick might just activate a fresh copy with slightly updated programming. The episode ends with the real family in space, but even they're not sure which decoys got killed. If the real Rick can't keep track of his own creations, how can we trust that this family is actually real? The whole idea of being original becomes meaningless when copies are perfect. Morty's existential crisis about being fake never gets resolved. He never gets definitive proof that he's real. Rick's barcode joke just deflects from the genuine horror of the situation. Morty's left with the same uncertainty that drives the entire conflict. Think about all those times Rick has casually mentioned Morty being replaceable. What if he's been speaking from experience? What if the original Morty died in some early adventure, and Rick just replaced him without missing a beat? The current Morty would have all the original's memories and think he survived whatever killed his predecessor. The most disturbing thing is how Rick talks about the decoys like they're malfunctioning equipment. He calls it more termite infestation than Blade Runner. That's not how you talk about people unless you've stopped seeing them as people. Rick might view all Mortys, including our Morty, as disposable tools. Remember how Rick reacted when he found out decoys were making decoys? He was annoyed by the logistics. That suggests he's thought about this stuff before and worked out the practical problems. Someone planning their first clone operation would be way less casual about it. The episode also shows us that decoys can be programmed with specific behaviors and limitations. What if our Morty has been programmed to be the perfect sidekick? His loyalty to Rick, despite constant abuse, might not be natural devotion but coded behavior. Here's another creepy thought. What if Rick has been running experiments on different Morty personalities? Maybe he's tried confident Mortys, rebellious Mortys, smart Mortys, and settled on the current anxious but loyal model because it works best for his needs. The way Rick dismisses Morty's concerns throughout the series makes more sense if Morty isn't irreplaceable. When Morty gets traumatized or starts questioning Rick, Rick just waits for him to get over it. Someone dealing with their one and only grandson would probably be more concerned about long-term psychological damage. Even the title, Mortyplicity, is a clue. It suggests there are multiple Mortys, not just decoys of the current Morty. What if Rick has been cycling through different Morty models for years, each one thinking they're the original? The really messed up part is that it wouldn't matter to Morty's daily experience. Clone or not, his memories and feelings are real to him. But knowing he could be a designed product rather than a real person would completely change how he sees his relationship with Rick and his own identity. The episode never actually resolves who's real and who's fake. Even at the end, we can't be sure we're following the original family. That uncertainty is the point. In a world where perfect copies exist, the concept of authenticity becomes meaningless, and that's terrifying. If Morty might be a clone without knowing, the darker twist is that he's also turning into Rick, as Rest and Ricklaxation makes clear. Detoxified Morty from Rest and Ricklaxation is basically a preview of what Morty's gonna turn into if he keeps hanging around Rick. Clean Morty acts exactly like a mini Rick, cold, manipulative, and completely selfish. The episode literally shows us Morty's future, and it's terrifying. When that detox machine strips away all of Morty's insecurities, what's left is a sociopath. Clean Morty doesn't give a crap about anyone else's feelings. He manipulates his classmates for attention, treats Jessica like garbage when she's uncomfortable, and immediately moves on to hitting on some random girl at a bar. Check out what happens at school. Clean Morty becomes popular by roasting his teacher and giving everyone fake motivational advice. But he doesn't actually care about helping these people. He just likes the power trip. When that kid plays trombone after Morty's pep talk, Morty takes all the credit, like he's some kind of guru. Then there's that disaster date with Jessica. She's clearly weirded out by how different he is, but Clean Morty doesn't even notice. He just keeps rambling about himself and then casually suggests she needs therapy. When she bails, he's like, "Whatever, life is a highway," and immediately starts hitting on someone else. That pickup routine with Stacy is straight up creepy. He's talking about wanting to please her and getting on his knees and all this manipulative garbage. It works because Clean Morty has Rick's confidence without any of the awkwardness that usually holds him back. He's learned to weaponize charm. But the real kicker is when Clean Morty becomes this Wall Street psychopath. He's living in a fancy apartment, dating some older woman, making money by screwing people over. When Jessica calls begging him to come back, he's ice cold about it. He knows it's Rick's trap, but he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. Here's what's really messed up about the detox machine. It removes toxicity based on each person's definition of what's toxic. For Rick, his irrational attachments to people are toxic. That means Rick literally considers caring about others to be a character flaw. That's why Clean Rick is so moral and healthy, while Toxic Rick is the part that actually loves Morty. Morty's learning the same twisted lesson. Every adventure with Rick teaches him that caring about people makes you weak. Every time Morty shows empathy or tries to do the right thing, it backfires spectacularly. The show keeps rewarding Rick's cynical worldview and punishing Morty for being decent. Look at Morty's character development throughout the series. He started as this innocent kid who was horrified when Rick casually murdered people. But now, Morty lies constantly, manipulates his family, and he's totally fine with sacrificing strangers for his own goals. He's slowly becoming Rick without even realizing it. Clean Morty isn't some random alternate personality. He's what Morty could become if he fully embraced Rick's philosophy. No more anxiety holding him back, no more guilt stopping him from taking what he wants. Just pure selfishness wrapped in confidence and success. And you know what? It works perfectly for him. Clean Morty is rich, confident, living in a penthouse with a beautiful girlfriend. Meanwhile, regular Morty is miserable and gets treated like crap by everyone, including Jessica. The episode basically shows us that being a good person leads to suffering, while being selfish leads to happiness. When Rick forces Morty to remerge with his toxic side, Morty immediately becomes miserable again. The show treats this like the right ending. But think about what that means. Morty's reward for staying good is getting to remain anxious, insecure, and depressed. That's pretty messed up. The worst part is that Clean Morty wasn't even lying about who he was. When Jacqueline asks if he was dishonest, Morty realizes he actually told her the truth about being a selfish runaway who became a stockbroker. Clean Morty embraced his nature while regular Morty is constantly lying and pretending to be better than he is. Even Jessica's reason for wanting old Morty back is toxic as hell. She admits she liked him because he loved her so much she never had to love him back. That's emotional exploitation. Jessica wanted a devoted puppy, not an equal partner. Clean Morty called her out on that dynamic and she couldn't handle it. The episode sets up this false choice between being good but weak or evil but effective. Rick's detox proves the same point. Clean Rick is genuinely moral and caring, but he's also indecisive and useless. Toxic Rick is an asshole, but he's the part that actually saves the world when it matters. Morty's absorbing these lessons faster than people realize. He's becoming more willing to sacrifice others, more comfortable with violence, more focused on getting what he wants. He's not turning into Clean Morty overnight, but he's definitely heading in that direction. And honestly, can you blame him? Why should Morty keep caring about people who constantly disappoint him? Why should he stay loyal to a family that barely appreciates his sacrifices? Why shouldn't he just take what he wants instead of waiting for scraps like Jessica's attention? Clean Morty represents Morty's inevitable future. He'll gain confidence and success by losing his capacity for genuine love and connection. He'll become everything he used to hate about Rick, but he'll be happy about it because he won't remember what he lost. The really tragic part is there's probably a middle ground between crippling anxiety and complete sociopathy. Morty could learn confidence without becoming heartless, but the show doesn't explore that option. It presents him with a binary choice. Given how the series has developed, Morty's probably going to choose to become evil eventually. He's already started down that path in later episodes. The detox machine just gave us a glimpse of the endpoint. A younger, more successful Rick who's traded his humanity for power. That transformation makes perfect sense given Morty's experiences. Every lesson he learns from Rick pushes him further toward that cold, calculating mindset. The show is basically documenting Morty's corruption in real time, and Clean Morty shows us exactly where it leads. The episode ends with Jessica telling Morty she's glad to have him back. But that's just Morty accepting that his reward for being good is staying miserable, while people like Jessica barely tolerate him. Meanwhile, Clean Morty was living his best life until Rick dragged him back down. If Clean Morty shows Morty turning into Rick, the Death Crystal episode shows he'll also become the one who takes Rick down. But before I tell you about that, subscribe to our channel. Morty's obsession with Jessica in Edge of Tomorty, Rick Die Rickpeat, directly causes Rick's death and sets up a pattern where Morty's selfish desires become the biggest threat to Rick's survival. This episode shows us that Rick's greatest enemy is his own grandson. The episode starts with the family dynamic shifting away from Rick's control. Beth and Jerry are now making Rick ask permission, instead of just dragging Morty along on adventures. This change in power dynamics creates tension between Rick and Morty that will eventually spiral into disaster. When they go to get death crystals, Rick explicitly warns Morty about their danger. He explains that knowing how you're gonna die makes you either boring as hell or about to get shit. Rick uses the crystals tactically to win fights, but he doesn't let them control his decisions. Morty, however, sees his ideal death scene with Jessica and becomes completely obsessed with making it happen. The moment Morty steals that death crystal, he stops being Rick's partner and becomes a liability. Instead of working together to get home safely, Morty starts steering the ship based on what the crystal shows him. When Rick tries to take control back, Morty refuses and fights him for the wheel. This power struggle directly leads to their crash and Rick getting impaled on those spikes. Think about what actually kills Rick in this episode. It was Morty's selfishness. Rick dies because Morty would rather chase his fantasy future with Jessica than listen to his grandfather's advice about staying alive in the present. After Rick dies, Morty has multiple opportunities to bring him back using the hologram's instructions. But instead of helping his grandfather, Morty steals the ship and abandons Rick's corpse. He's so focused on his death crystal vision that he'd rather let Rick stay dead than risk changing his future with Jessica. Meanwhile, Rick gets stuck, bouncing between fascist realities because his backup system was rerouted due to Morty's actions. Rick has to commit suicide over and over again just to find a peaceful dimension where someone will help him get home. Every death Rick experiences in those fascist universes is a direct consequence of Morty's selfish decision. When Rick finally makes it back, he finds that Morty has stolen all his best equipment and left him with knockoff Meeseeks boxes. Morty used Rick's weapons and technology to go on a killing spree, all guided by his obsession with that death crystal vision. The episode shows Morty becoming increasingly destructive and powerful, while Rick remains trapped and helpless. The pattern here is terrifying. Morty's personal desires override his loyalty to Rick every single time. When forced to choose between helping Rick and pursuing his own goals, Morty consistently picks himself. He lets Rick die, abandons his corpse, steals his stuff, and causes chaos across the city. Even when they're finally reunited, Morty doesn't really apologize for getting Rick killed. He just says sorry for not listening, like it was a minor disagreement instead of literal murder by negligence. Rick takes it in stride, but this sets up a dangerous precedent where Morty faces no real consequences for putting his own interests above Rick's life. The episode ends with Morty discovering that his death crystal vision was misleading. Jessica wants to work in hospice care, meaning she'll be around dying old people all the time. Morty's perfect death was just him being another anonymous patient that Jessica comforts as part of her job. His entire obsession was based on a misunderstanding. This revelation makes Morty furious, and when Rick shows up asking for another adventure, Morty immediately agrees with an almost manic enthusiasm. The episode suggests that Morty's anger and disillusionment might make him even more dangerous in future adventures. The real disturbing part is how this episode establishes Morty as Rick's greatest weakness. Rick can handle interdimensional criminals, government agents, and cosmic threats, but he can't handle his own grandson's betrayal. When Morty turns selfish, Rick becomes completely vulnerable. Throughout the series, we see this pattern repeat. Morty's emotional needs and personal desires consistently put Rick in danger. Whether it's love potions, video games, or family drama, Morty's problems always escalate into life-threatening situations for both of them. Rick's genius means he has enemies everywhere who want to exploit his knowledge or eliminate him as a threat. But those enemies need to get close to Rick first, and Morty is the perfect vector. Rick's attachment to Morty makes him predictable and exploitable in ways that his intelligence alone can't protect against. The Death Crystal incident proves that Morty doesn't need to be intentionally malicious to destroy Rick. His selfishness and poor judgment are enough. When Morty prioritizes his own happiness over Rick's safety, people die. When he refuses to listen to Rick's warnings, disasters follow. Future episodes show Morty becoming more confident and independent, which sounds positive but actually makes him more dangerous. A Morty who thinks he knows better than Rick is a Morty who will make the same mistakes that got Rick killed in this episode. Except next time, Rick might not have a backup system to save him. The episode also reveals how dependent Rick has become on Morty. Rick's Operation Phoenix was supposed to be disabled, but it reactivated because Rick needed help getting home. Rick's safety net only works when there's someone around who cares enough to help him. If Morty ever fully turns against Rick, those safety nets become useless. This creates a terrifying feedback loop. The more Rick depends on Morty, the more power Morty has to hurt him. The more power Morty gets, the more likely he is to abuse it for his own purposes. Eventually, Morty's going to face a situation where killing Rick serves his interests, and Rick won't see it coming because he trusts his grandson too much. The Death Crystal episode is just the beginning. It shows us exactly how Rick's downfall will happen, not through some grand conspiracy or evil plot, but through Morty's ordinary human selfishness, combined with access to Rick's extraordinary technology. Rick's greatest creation is the grandson he's trained to be just dangerous enough to destroy him. Morty puts Rick's life at risk, and it gets worse when you realize Rick's flask might be fueling him with more than just booze. Rick's constant drinking might not be alcohol at all, but a watered-down mega seed mix that keeps his brain working at genius level. The pilot shows us exactly what these seeds do, and Rick acts like someone who's hooked on brain-boosting drugs. The pilot proves that mega seeds make you super smart but mess you up afterward. When Morty gets those seeds in his system, he can suddenly solve crazy math problems and explain science stuff. But Rick warns him that when they wear off, Morty's gonna lose his motor skills and brain power for 3 whole days. Rick's always got that flask with him, taking sips constantly. Everyone thinks it's just booze, but what if it's actually mega seed juice? That would explain why Rick stays the smartest guy in the universe while also acting drunk and drooling all the time. Check out Rick's symptoms. He's always drooling, slurring words, and stumbling around. In the pilot, these are the exact same things that happen to Morty when the mega seeds start wearing off. Rick says you lose motor skills and brain function. Rick shows these same problems constantly, like he's always coming down from mega seeds. The timeline works too. Rick says he's smuggled stuff through customs tons of times before, so he's had access to mega seeds for years. If Rick figured out that small doses could keep him smart without the brutal 3-day crash, he'd totally get addicted to that boost. Think about Rick's personality. He's obsessed with being the smartest person ever and won't shut up about his genius. Someone that ego-driven about their intelligence would definitely abuse brain drugs. Rick would rather be a functioning addict than risk losing his mental edge. Rick's age backs this up too. He talks about spending time in dimensions with crazy advanced medicine and anti-aging tech. Maybe Rick doesn't naturally age slower, but the mega seed mix keeps him alive longer. That's why he looks preserved, but also kinda messed up at the same time. The withdrawal explains Rick's behavior perfectly. When people come down from stimulants, they get cranky, paranoid, and emotionally unstable. Rick hits all these marks. His random blow-ups, his cruelty to his family, his inability to have normal relationships, these could all be withdrawal symptoms from his mega seed habit. Rick's intelligence seems inconsistent sometimes too. There are episodes where he makes dumb mistakes or doesn't see obvious stuff coming. What if those are moments when his serum levels are running low? When Rick's not at peak brain enhancement, he becomes more human and fallible. The mega seeds might explain Rick's obsession with dimension hopping. He needs fresh seeds constantly to feed his habit, which means regular trips to Dimension 35C or similar places. Rick's adventures might just be elaborate drug runs dressed up as science missions. This theory explains why all Ricks act the same way too. Every Rick we meet has that same drooling, stumbling, genius, but messed up personality. If every Rick discovers mega seeds and gets hooked on the brain boost, they'd all develop the same symptoms and behaviors. The Citadel of Ricks makes way more sense now. It's basically a drug cartel controlling mega seed distribution. They probably make sure every Rick gets their fix while keeping quality control. That's why Rick C-137 won't join. He doesn't want to depend on their supply or follow their rules about how much he can use. Rick's relationship with Morty gets way darker with this reading. Rick doesn't just need Morty to hide his brainwaves, he needs him as a drug smuggler. The pilot shows Rick forcing Morty to hide seeds in his body, but what if that happens all the time? Rick might be using Morty to keep his personal stash going. The episode shows that Rick's done the butt smuggling thing so much it doesn't work for him anymore. That means Rick's been moving mega seeds for years, probably to feed his own habit. His tolerance got so high that he can't hide them in his own body anymore. Rick's emotional coldness could be another side effect. Long-term stimulant abuse often leads to emotional numbness and trouble connecting with people. Rick's famous lack of empathy might not be natural but drug damage from years of mega seed abuse. Rick knowing the exact withdrawal timeline is super suspicious. He tells Morty he'll lose brain function for 72 hours, starting right about now. That's really specific knowledge for someone who's supposedly never used mega seeds on humans before. Rick knows because he's been through withdrawal himself. Rick's paranoia about the outside world makes more sense if he's protecting his drug supply. Rick tells Morty they're the only friends we've got, and the world will tear them apart if people find out what's important. Maybe Rick's scared people will discover his mega seed addiction and cut him off. The pilot ends with Rick's crazy rambling about future adventures while Morty suffers withdrawal. Rick's excitement about running around and doing science sounds like someone planning their next drug run. He's already thinking about the next batch of mega seeds they'll need. This habit would explain Rick's self-destructive behavior throughout the series. He constantly puts himself and his family in danger, makes enemies everywhere, and burns bridges with anyone who could help. That's classic addict stuff, putting the substance above everything else in your life. Rick's wubba lubba dub dub catchphrase gets darker meaning too. Later we learn it means, "I am in great pain. Please help me," in bird person's language. What if Rick's pain is physical withdrawal from mega seed dependency? He's literally crying for help in a language nobody around him gets. The way Rick treats his inventions suggests drug-focused priorities. Most of his gadgets either help him get resources for adventures or protect him during dangerous missions. Everything Rick builds ultimately helps him keep traveling to worlds where he can find mega seeds or similar brain boosters. Rick's attitude toward other smart people is telling. He constantly trashes earth science and calls academics morons. Maybe that's because their natural intelligence looks pathetic compared to his artificially boosted brain. Rick can't relate to normal human smarts anymore because he's been chemically enhanced for so long. The government wanting Rick makes more sense if they think he has brain enhancement tech. They're not just after his portal gun or sci-fi stuff. They want to understand how he stays superhuman smart. The mega seed theory would make Rick a national security target. Rick's casual attitude during Morty's withdrawal scene is really disturbing. Rick watches his grandson shake and lose motor control without much concern. That's how someone acts when they've normalized the withdrawal process because they go through it themselves regularly. The worst part is that Rick's basically training Morty to be his replacement supplier. Every time Morty smuggles seeds or gets them in his system, he's learning to see this as normal. Rick's creating another addict to keep his supply chain going, even if something happens to him. But here's the thing, this is just a fan theory about a fictional character. The show presents Rick's drinking as alcoholism, which is already a serious issue. Whether it's alcohol or fictional mega seeds, the show depicts the real damage that addiction does to relationships and families. Rick might be addicted to mega seeds in his flask, and it gets darker when even he's terrified by the talking cat's true nature. The talking cat from Claw and Hoarder is a cosmic horror entity that's so messed up that even Rick can't handle looking at its memories. When Rick scans that cat's brain, he doesn't just see something gross or weird. He sees something that breaks his whole understanding of reality. Rick has been everywhere and seen everything. He's traveled through infinite dimensions, made universes, fought gods, and dealt with every kind of twisted nightmare you can think of. But when he peeks into that cat's head, Rick, the guy who literally doesn't give a crap about anything, immediately looks away like he's gonna puke. That's pure terror. The cat's whole vibe screams cosmic horror monster. It just shows up in Jerry's house out of nowhere with zero explanation. Then it immediately tries to shut down any questions about what it is. "Don't ask why I can talk," it keeps saying. "Just have fun." That's classic manipulation from something that really doesn't want you looking too closely at what it actually is. Think about how this thing operates. It doesn't want Jerry to think or ask questions about anything. It just wants him to go with the flow and have mindless fun. That's exactly how these Lovecraftian nightmare entities work. They keep humans distracted and stupid while they do whatever horrible stuff they're really up to. The cat specifically wants to go to Florida because they don't ask questions there. What kind of space alien needs a place where people don't ask questions? Something that's hiding stuff so terrible that any real investigation would blow its cover completely. Florida is a hunting ground where it can operate freely. When Rick finally traps the cat and does his mind scan thing, both he and Jerry have the exact same reaction. They get completely traumatized. Jerry starts puking and crawling backwards through the sand like he's trying to get away from something. Rick, who's normally making jokes about everything, just screams at the cat to get lost. That's psychological damage. Rick choosing to wipe Jerry's memory instead of letting him remember tells us everything we need to know. Rick has shown Jerry tons of disturbing crap before and never bothered protecting him from it. But this time, Rick thinks whatever Jerry saw is so harmful that he's better off not knowing. Rick would rather violate Jerry's mind than let him live with that knowledge. Jerry's reaction before the memory wipe is really telling too. He says, "Someone needs to remember," but Rick zaps his brain anyway. Rick doesn't think this is the kind of truth that anyone should have to carry around. When Rick, who's all about harsh realities and uncomfortable truths, decides something is too dangerous to know, that should scare the hell out of you. The cat's casual attitude about everything is another huge red flag. It shows zero emotion when Rick threatens it, or when Jerry gets traumatized by its memories. It just keeps saying it wants to make amends, like this is some minor misunderstanding. That's how predators act when they get caught red-handed. The episode's structure backs up the Eldritch theory too. The cat's subplot runs alongside the dragon story, but where the dragons are obviously sexual and chaotic, the cat is subtle and sneaky. It's like the show is comparing obvious supernatural threats with hidden cosmic horrors. The dragons are scary, but you can understand them. The cat is something completely different. Rick's scanning device works by looking through memories and experiences. If the cat was just some perverted alien or regular space criminal, Rick would have seen crimes or weird alien customs. Instead, he sees something that makes him recoil in pure existential horror. Whatever the cat has done or actually is, it operates on a level that even Rick's massive brain can't handle. The cat pushing Jerry to have fun and stop asking questions is straight out of the cosmic horror playbook. These entities want humans distracted and compliant while they carry out plans that human minds literally can't comprehend. The cat doesn't want Jerry thinking because thinking leads to questions, and questions might reveal what it really is underneath that cute exterior. When the cat gets thrown off that yacht in Florida, it doesn't seem bothered at all. It just swims back to Jerry like nothing happened. That's N. The behavior of something that sees Jerry as useful for whatever goals it has, not as an actual friend or companion. The fact that the cat teams up with Balthromaw at the end isn't some random cute moment. Both of them got rejected by humans after their true natures came out. But while Balthromaw was just sexually inappropriate and clingy, the cat represents something so fundamentally wrong that Rick chose amnesia over understanding. Rick's reaction suggests the cat's memories contain something that would challenge basic assumptions about how reality works. Maybe the cat has witnessed the heat death of multiple universes, or knows something about the nature of existence that would drive people completely insane. Maybe it's not even from this reality originally, but from something that exists beyond the entire multiverse. The cat's ability to talk is a core part of whatever this thing actually is. When Jerry asks why it can talk, the cat deflects hard because the real answer would give away its true nature immediately. The talking is just part of being whatever eldritch nightmare the cat really is. Rick's decision to dump the cat in the desert instead of killing it suggests he knows it can't actually be stopped or destroyed. You don't leave cosmic-level threats alive unless you know killing them won't work, or might make things worse. Rick banishes the cat because complete destruction isn't an option when you're dealing with entities that exist outside normal reality. The post-credits scene where the cat hooks up with Balthromaw should be way more disturbing than it seems. Now you've got a cosmic horror entity working with a dragon that can fly anywhere and burn anything. That's two rejected supernatural beings potentially planning something terrible together. The episode never explains what Rick and Jerry actually saw in that cat's mind, and that's completely intentional. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share, even with the audience watching at home. The cat represents the kind of cosmic horror that can't be defeated, understood, or reasoned with. It can only be avoided and forgotten. What makes this even more terrifying is that the cat is still out there somewhere. Rick didn't solve the problem, he just kicked it down the road. That thing is probably planning its next move, looking for its next Jerry to manipulate and use for whatever cosmic nightmare it's working toward. The scariest part is how normal and friendly the cat seemed at first. It wasn't obviously threatening or weird until Rick dug deeper. That suggests there might be other entities like this scattered throughout the multiverse, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true nature. The talking cat proves there are horrors in the multiverse too terrifying even for Rick. And the Cronenberg world shows the lasting trauma Rick leaves behind when he runs from his own disasters. When Rick and Morty go back to their original dimension in The Rick Shank Rickdemption, we see something absolutely horrifying that the show just glosses over. Their original family are completely broken by the Cronenberg apocalypse. And Rick, he doesn't even care. This is the world Rick destroyed in Rick Potion number 9 when his love potion went wrong and turned everyone into mutated monsters. Instead of fixing it, Rick just grabbed Morty and ditched his entire family to die in a post-apocalyptic nightmare. But here's what's really messed up. Rick treats this like it's no big deal. Look at what their original family has become. Jerry, Beth, and Summer are eating roasted Cronenberg meat like it's Thanksgiving dinner. They've been living in this hellscape for months, fighting mutated humans just to stay alive. These aren't the same people Rick left behind, they're traumatized survivors who've had to become cannibals. The moment Jerry sees that portal gun, he immediately destroys it. Why? Because he knows Rick stinks and brings nothing but destruction. This is a hardened survivor who's learned that Rick is poison. He'd rather stay trapped in his nightmare world than risk letting Rick make things worse. Beth and Summer react the same way. They can smell Rick on replacement Summer and want to kill her immediately. These people have been so traumatized by Rick's abandonment that anything connected to him triggers pure rage. They know Rick destroyed their world and then just left them to die. But here's what makes this really disturbing. Rick commits this kind of genocide constantly. Every time he screws up a dimension and hops to a new one, he's abandoning billions of people to whatever nightmare he created. The show treats dimension hopping like changing TV channels, but Rick is literally a serial world killer. Think about what we're actually seeing in Cronenberg world. This is a complete extinction event. Civilization has collapsed, cities are in ruins, and the few remaining humans are eating each other. Rick caused all of this and then just walked away when it got inconvenient. The original Jerry destroying that portal gun might be the most heroic thing anyone does in the entire series. He's protecting the multiverse from Rick by making sure he can't keep jumping around and abandoning his messes. Jerry figured out what the audience somehow misses. Rick is a plague who destroys everything he touches. What's really sick is that Rick could probably fix Cronenberg world if he wanted to. He's smart enough to solve almost any problem, but he chooses not to because it's easier to just find a replacement reality. Rick doesn't commit genocide out of evil, he does it out of pure laziness. The show uses this as a lesson for Summer about how Rick abandons people, but it completely ignores the bigger picture. Rick is one of the biggest mass murderers in the multiverse. Every dimension he abandons is filled with people he's condemned to death. The Cronenberg family shows us what Rick's nihilism actually looks like in practice. It's a weapon he uses to justify abandoning people when they become inconvenient. Rick tells himself nothing matters, so he doesn't have to feel guilty about destroying entire civilizations. When replacement Summer sees her original family eating human meat, she's horrified. But she should be. Summer sees her reptutant casted of her asmany bread. This is what happens to the people Rick leaves behind. They don't just disappear when Rick moves on to a new dimension. The episode tries to frame the Cronenberg family as proof that Rick doesn't care about anyone, but that misses the point completely. Rick doesn't just not care, he actively creates the conditions for this suffering and then runs away from it. What makes this even worse is that Rick never learns from this experience. He sees his original family living as cannibals in a wasteland he created, and it doesn't change his behavior at all. By the end of the episode, he's already planning more adventures that will probably create more Cronenberg worlds. The original family's reaction to seeing Rick's influence shows they understand something the replacement family doesn't. Rick is a virus that infects everything he touches. They've experienced firsthand what happens when Rick decides your reality isn't worth saving anymore. Think about the sheer scale of Rick's abandonment. Every botched science experiment, every failed adventure, every time he got bored and moved on to something new. Each of those moments represents entire worlds full of people left to deal with Rick's messes alone. Rick's government takedown at the end gets framed like this clever victory. But it's just more destruction. Rick destabilizes entire civilizations when they annoy him, then moves on without thinking about the consequences. How many people died when the Galactic Federation collapsed? Rick doesn't know and doesn't care. The Cronenberg family probably still loves their Rick, even after everything he put them through. They're broken and traumatized, but they're still the same people who used to have family dinners with him. Rick destroyed that family and then just replaced them like they were NPCs in a video game. When Jerry smashes the portal gun, he's making a statement. No more Ricks. No more abandonment. No more watching someone you love destroy everything and then disappear. Jerry would rather live in hell than go through that betrayal again. Here's what really gets me. Rick has the technology to monitor infinite realities. He could check up on the worlds he's abandoned. He could see how his original family is doing. But he doesn't, because that would require admitting they matter. Rick's whole philosophy depends on pretending his actions don't have consequences. The episode shows us that Rick's family would actually be better off without him. The Cronenberg versions have survived incredible hardship and stuck together as a unit. They've become stronger and more capable than the replacement family that still depends on Rick's protection. Rick's casual attitude toward dimension hopping makes him worse than most comic book villains. At least traditional bad guys have goals or motivations. Rick destroys entire worlds just because fixing his mistakes is too much work. That's pure evil disguised as indifference. The most telling moment is when Rick sees his original family and shows zero remorse. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't offer to help. He doesn't even acknowledge what he did to them. Rick has completely dehumanized the people he's supposed to care about most. The Cronenberg world is Rick's greatest crime, and he never even acknowledges it happened. While he's making jokes about Szechuan sauce, his original family is still out there eating human meat and fighting for survival in the wasteland he created. That's the real Rick and Morty, a story about a man who commits genocide and then forgets about it 5 minutes later. Cronenberg world shows the endless trauma Rick leaves behind, and Morty's purge rampage proves that the same cruelty is already festering inside him. Morty's purge rampage in Look Who's Purging Now reveals something way darker than just repressed teenage anger. When Morty gets those power suits and starts slaughtering people, He doesn't just lose control, he finds something he's been hiding his whole life. Rick is genuinely shocked by how brutal Morty becomes, and Rick has seen some shit. The episode tries to explain away Morty's violence with that purge candy bar twist at the end. Rick tells Morty it was all just chemicals making him act crazy, but watch that final scene again. Rick throws away his candy bar, and the wrapper clearly says, "Now purge free." Rick's been eating the regular version while Morty got the drugged one. But here's the thing, Rick didn't go on a psychotic killing spree like Morty did. Think about how Morty acts when he gets that power armor. At first, he's hesitant, but once he starts killing, he completely loses himself in it. He's actively hunting down people who are trying to hide. He's shooting corpses over and over again just because he can. Rick, who has zero problem with violence, actually gets disturbed by Morty's behavior. Rick tells him to calm down multiple times and even has to physically restrain him. When someone who casually commits genocide thinks you're being too violent, that's saying something. The scariest part is how much Morty enjoys it. He's laughing, screaming with joy, and completely ignoring Rick's attempts to get him to stop. This is someone discovering they love hurting people. The power armor is just giving Morty permission to be who he really is, underneath. Look at the progression throughout the episode. Morty starts by wanting to help Arthresia because he thinks she's innocent. But the moment he gets betrayed and shot at, something switches in his brain. By the end, he's threatening to kill Rick and rip his guts out. That's personal hatred coming to the surface. The lighthouse scene shows Morty's capacity for cruelty even before the power suits show up. When that guy criticizes his feedback on the screenplay, Morty doesn't just push him. He throws him down a flight of stairs and then mocks him as he's dying. "You like that? You want me to cut to 3 weeks earlier when you were alive?" Rick's reaction to Morty pushing the lighthouse keeper is telling. He says, "Whoa, Morty, you just purged," like he's surprised. Rick expected Morty to maybe fight back or defend himself, but he didn't expect Morty to murder someone over a screenplay critique. Even Rick knows that response was way over the line. The episode keeps showing us that Morty's innocence is mostly just lack of opportunity. Put him in a situation where violence is normalized and consequences don't exist, and Morty turns into a monster faster than anyone expected. He doesn't need much convincing or encouragement, he just needs permission. When Morty threatens to kill Rick at the end, there's real hatred in his voice. He's talking about grievances he's been carrying for a long time. "This has been a long time coming," he says. Morty's been fantasizing about murdering his grandfather, and the purge just gave him an excuse to say it out loud. The purge and all excuse is Rick's way of protecting Morty from having to face what he really is. Rick sees that Morty enjoyed the violence way too much and gives him a chemical explanation so he doesn't have to confront his own capacity for evil. Rick is essentially gaslighting Morty into thinking his true nature was just a drug reaction. But think about all the other times Morty has shown violent tendencies throughout the series. He's threatened people, gotten into fights, and shown zero empathy for strangers in dangerous situations. The Purge episode is just the first time Morty had the tools and permission to really express himself. The episode also shows that Morty's empathy is incredibly selective. He wants to save Arthresia because she's a pretty girl in distress, but once she betrays him, he immediately wants her dead. Morty doesn't have consistent moral principles, he has emotional reactions that he disguises as morality. When Rick asks Morty to help him fight off attackers earlier in the episode, Morty refuses and tries to negotiate. But the moment Morty gets superior firepower, he becomes the aggressor. Morty's pacifism only exists when he's in a weak position. Give him strength, and he turns into a predator. The ending where Morty gets rejected by Arthresia is brutal because it shows how quickly Morty's heroic motivations disappear. He helped end the festival and overthrow the ruling class. But the moment the girl doesn't want to sleep with him, none of that matters anymore. Morty's entire moral framework is based on what he thinks will get him laid. Rick's decision to lie about the purginol shows he understands something important about Morty. Rick knows that Morty needs to believe he's fundamentally good, even though the evidence suggests otherwise. Rick is protecting Morty's self-image because he knows Morty couldn't handle the truth about his own nature. The post-credits scene where the Purge planet immediately devolves back into violence proves that the cycle will continue. Just like that society, Morty's capacity for violence hasn't been eliminated, it's just been temporarily suppressed. The next time Morty gets the right combination of power and permission, he'll probably be even worse. Morty's buried violence is scarier than Rick's open nihilism because at least Rick is honest about what he is. Morty hides his darkness behind a mask of victimhood and moral superiority. He thinks he's the good guy in every situation, which makes him way more dangerous than someone who knows they're evil. The Purge episode shows us that under the right circumstances, Morty could easily become worse than Rick. Rick kills people for practical reasons or when they get in his way. Morty kills people because he enjoys watching them suffer. That's the difference between a sociopath and a sadist. Morty's purge rampage shows his love for violence, and the retelling makes it clear this darkness is part of who he is. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Morty's purge rampage in Look Who's Purging Now shows something way darker than just teenage anger issues. When Morty gets those power suits and starts massacring people, he doesn't just lose control, he finds something he's been hiding his whole life. And Rick, who's seen everything, is genuinely freaked out by how brutal Morty gets. The episode tries to cover this up with that purge and all candy bar twist at the end. Rick tells Morty it was all chemicals making him crazy. But look at that final scene again. Rick throws away his candy bar and the wrapper says now purge and all free. So Rick was eating the normal version while Morty got the drugged one. But here's the thing, Rick didn't go on some psychotic killing spree like Morty did. Think about how Morty acts when he gets that armor. At first he's scared, but once he starts killing, he goes completely nuts. He's not defending himself or following Rick's lead, he's actively hunting down people trying to hide from him. He's shooting dead bodies over and over just because he can. Rick, who kills people all the time, actually gets disturbed watching Morty. Rick keeps telling him to calm down, and even has to stun him with a taser. When someone who casually destroys civilizations thinks you're being too violent, that's really saying something. The worst part is how much fun Morty has doing it. He's laughing, screaming with joy, totally ignoring Rick trying to get him to stop. This is someone discovering they love hurting people. The armor just gives Morty permission to be who he really is underneath. Look at how things progress during the episode. Morty starts wanting to help Arthresia because he thinks she's some innocent victim. But the moment she betrays him and shoots Rick, something flips in his brain. By the end, he's threatening to murder Rick and rip his guts out. That's personal hatred bubbling up. The lighthouse scene shows Morty's cruel side even before the power suits show up. When that guy gives him feedback on his terrible screenplay, Morty doesn't just get mad, he throws the guy downstairs and mocks him while he's dying. You like that? You want me to cut to 3 weeks earlier when you were alive? Rick's reaction when Morty kills the lighthouse keeper is telling. He goes, "Whoa, Morty, you just purged," like he's surprised. Rick expected maybe some self-defense, but he didn't expect Morty to murder someone over screenplay criticism. Even Rick knows that was way over the line. The episode keeps showing us that Morty's goodness is mostly just lack of opportunity. Put him somewhere violence is normal and consequences don't exist. And Morty turns into a monster faster than anyone thought possible. He doesn't need convincing, he just needs permission. When Morty threatens Rick at the end, there's real hatred in his voice. He's talking about stuff he's been carrying around for ages. "This has been a long time coming," he says. Morty's been fantasizing about killing his grandpa, and the purge just gave him an excuse to say it. The purge and all thing is Rick protecting Morty from having to face what he really is. Rick sees that Morty enjoyed the violence way too much and gives him a chemical excuse so he doesn't have to deal with his own evil side. Rick is basically lying to Morty about his own nature. But think about all the other times Morty's shown violent tendencies throughout the show. He threatens people, gets in fights, shows zero empathy for strangers in danger. The Purge episode is just the first time Morty had the tools and permission to really let loose. The episode also shows Morty's empathy is super selective. He wants to save Arthresia because she's a hot girl in trouble, but once she screws him over, he immediately wants her dead. Morty doesn't have real moral principles, he has emotional reactions he pretends are morality. Earlier, when Rick asks Morty to help fight off attackers, Morty refuses and tries to talk his way out. But the second Morty gets superior firepower, he becomes the aggressor. Morty's pacifism only exists when he's weak. Give him strength and he turns predator. The ending where Arthresia rejects him is brutal because it shows how fast Morty's heroic motivations disappear. He helped end the festival and overthrow the ruling class, but the moment the girl doesn't want him, none of that matters. Morty's entire moral system is based on what he thinks will get him laid. Rick lying about the purge and all shows he gets something important about Morty. Rick knows Morty needs to believe he's fundamentally good, even though the evidence says otherwise. Rick protects Morty's self-image because he knows Morty couldn't handle the truth about himself. The post-credits scene where the Purge planet immediately goes back to violence proves the cycle continues. Just like that society, Morty's violent side hasn't been eliminated, it's just temporarily hidden. Next time Morty gets the right mix of power and permission, he'll probably be even worse. Morty's hidden violence is scarier than Rick's open nihilism because at least Rick is honest about what he is. Morty hides his darkness behind victimhood and moral superiority. He thinks he's the good guy in every situation, which makes him way more dangerous than someone who knows they're evil. The Purge episode shows that under the right circumstances, Morty could easily become worse than Rick. Rick kills people for practical reasons or when they're in his way. Morty kills people because he enjoys watching them suffer. That's the difference between a sociopath and a sadist. Morty's purge shows his hidden cruelty breaking through, and Beth's clone reveal proves Rick spreads the same kind of damage by turning his daughter's life into a cold experiment. The Beth clone reveal in Star Mort, Rick Turn of the Jerry, is way more messed up than people realize. Rick didn't just make a clone and forget which was which, he deliberately chose not to know. That's straight-up emotional manipulation designed to avoid taking responsibility for his feelings. When Rick shows that memory at the end, we see the real horror. Beth asks him to make the choice for her stay on Earth or go to space. She wants to know what he actually wants from his daughter. Instead of giving her a real answer, Rick makes both versions and then scrambles them so he can't tell which is which. Think about how twisted that is. Beth's asking for genuine connection with her dad, and Rick's response is to turn her into some kind of science experiment. He gets to have everything a space adventurer, daughter, and a stay-at-home family daughter, without having to commit to actually loving either one specifically. The episode tries to make this seem like Rick being too emotionally damaged to make hard choices, but that's bullshit. Rick makes life or death decisions all the time. He can choose to blow up entire governments, but can't choose whether he wants his daughter to stick around? That's just being a coward. Rick's randomization is protecting him from having to face what he actually wants. If he'd picked Beth to stay, he'd have to admit he needs his family. If he'd picked her to leave, he'd have to admit he doesn't care enough to keep her. So instead, he creates this situation where he never has to deal with his own feelings. The identity horror goes way deeper than just which one is real. Both Beths have been living with constant fear that they're the fake one. Space Beth thinks her adventures don't matter because she might just be a copy. Earth Beth thinks her family life is meaningless because she might be the leftover. Rick's uncertainty has infected both of their entire identities. Watch how Rick acts around both Beths during the episode. He treats them exactly the same, sarcastic, dismissive, emotionally distant. That's because he's trained himself not to have a preference. Rick has actively killed any parental instinct that might give away which Beth he really loves. The bomb in Space Beth's neck is even worse when you realize Rick doesn't know which Beth it's in. He was willing to murder his own daughter, but he made sure he wouldn't know which one he was killing. That way he could tell himself he was just getting rid of the fake one, even though he has no clue which is which. Both Beths calling Rick a piece of shit at the end is understanding. They've figured out that Rick's whole setup is designed to avoid loving either of them fully. Rick gets all the benefits of having daughters without the emotional risk of actually caring about specific people. Rick erasing his memory of which is which shows this was always his plan. Rick didn't want to know because knowing would force him to feel something real. By staying ignorant, he can keep emotional distance from both versions of his daughter. Rick trying to show them the memory is his last desperate attempt to make the Beths need him. He's offering them the one thing they've both been wanting proof of which one is real. But they tell him to shove it because they've realized Rick's approval isn't worth having anymore. The episode shows that Rick's treatment actually made both Beths stronger people. Space Beth got confident by becoming this badass galactic rebel. Rick's abandonment forced both versions to become complete people on their own. When both Beths say they don't care what's in the memory, they're rejecting Rick's whole game. The question of which is real only matters if you buy into Rick's idea that clones are worth less than originals. Both Beths have decided their value doesn't depend on Rick's science experiment. Rick's reaction to getting rejected shows how much his whole system depended on the Beths needing his approval. When they don't care about his memory, Rick has nothing left to offer them. His manipulation completely backfired. The memory shows that Beth actually wanted Rick to make an emotional choice about her life. She was asking him to prove he cared enough about her to have a preference. Instead, Rick showed her that he cared so little, he could flip a coin with her existence. The fact that Rick sits alone with Phoenix Person at the end is perfect. He surrounded himself with broken relationships because he refuses to make emotional commitments. Phoenix Person is the only friend he has left, and that's because Rick can't abandon someone who's already dead inside. The clone situation is Rick's ultimate expression of his nothing matters philosophy. If people are replaceable, then why not make multiple versions? But the episode shows that Rick's worldview has cut him off from everyone who might actually love him. Both Beths walking away together shows they've found something Rick never could: genuine connection, based on understanding instead of manipulation. They've chosen to see each other as equals instead of competing for Rick's attention. Here's what makes this really sick. Rick created two daughters who both have to live with existential dread about whether they're real or not. Space Beth questions if her adventures matter. Earth Beth questions if her family life is authentic. Rick gave both of his daughters an identity crisis just so he wouldn't have to pick which version of his daughter he preferred. The bomb thing gets even darker when you think about it more. Rick was ready to blow up one of his daughters, but he specifically made sure he wouldn't know which one. That way he could sleep at night thinking he only killed the fake one, even though he deliberately made it impossible to know which was which. Rick's whole system is designed around avoiding vulnerability. He can't just love his daughter because that would mean risking getting hurt. So instead, He creates this elaborate setup where he gets the benefits of having a daughter without the emotional investment of actually caring about a specific person. The worst part is how this affected both Beths throughout their lives. Earth Beth probably spent years wondering if her feelings and memories were real. Space Beth probably questioned whether her rebellion against the Federation mattered if she was just a copy. Rick gave both versions of his daughter an existential crisis as a side effect of his emotional cowardice. When the family says they don't want to see the memory, it's because they've all grown beyond needing Rick's validation. Morty and Summer are happy having two moms. Jerry's happy having two wives, though that's not happening. The Beths are happy having found each other. Rick is the only one still obsessing over which is real. The real horror is that Rick created a situation where both his daughters had to live with uncertainty about their own reality just so he could avoid making an emotional commitment. That's just really sophisticated emotional abuse. Rick's clone trick leaves both Beths broken. And Summer's time in the wasteland shows she's the one really becoming like Rick. Everyone thinks Morty is Rick's heir, but they're wrong. Summer is the real Sanchez. She's got Rick's cold logic, his ruthlessness, and his ability to manipulate situations without getting emotional about it. Rickmancing the Stone proves this theory completely. The whole episode basically shows Summer becoming a post-apocalyptic warlord, while Morty has a therapy session with a magic arm. That's showing us who really takes after Grandpa Rick. So, Jerry moves out because of the divorce, and the family is falling apart. Rick decides to take the kids to some Mad Max wasteland to steal this powerful rock called Isotope 322. Normal family bonding time, right? But what happens next shows you everything about who these kids really are. When they get attacked by the Deathstalkers, Morty freaks out. He's scared of the violence and grossed out by people eating human flesh. Rick just shrugs it off like it's Tuesday. But Summer? She sees an opportunity. The second they meet these post-apocalyptic raiders, Summer kills their leader. Just shoots him dead without thinking twice. When he's crawling around begging to die, she says, "Okay, but not because you told me to," and pulls the trigger. That's calculated execution. And here's the crazy part, she doesn't feel bad about it. Most teenagers would be traumatized by their first murder. Summer puts her foot on the corpse and stares down an entire gang of killers. When their new leader offers to let her join them, she doesn't hesitate. She sees the strategic value and takes it. Meanwhile, Rick has to inject Morty with muscle memory from dead people just so he can survive fighting in their gladiator arena. Even with superpowers, Morty spends the whole time crying about his parents' divorce. He's beating people up while screaming about Jerry being weak. That's therapy with violence. Summer goes off on raids and starts building real relationships with these killers. She's not processing emotions, she's gaining power. When she hooks up with Hemorrhage, the new Deathstalker leader, it's because dating the boss gives her influence over the whole group. But here's where it gets really messed up. Rick was playing them the whole time. He used that magic rock to turn their wasteland into suburban hell in 3 weeks. Summer ends up trapped in a boring marriage with Hemorrhage, who's now watching TV instead of leading raids. Most people would be pissed about getting manipulated like that. Morty definitely would have thrown a fit. But Summer? She just looks at Rick and says, "Cut the crap, Rick. You proved your point. Let's go home." That's pure Rick Sanchez thinking right there. No hurt feelings, no anger about being tricked, just cold recognition of what happened and practical acceptance. Summer understood Rick was teaching her a lesson about running from problems, and instead of getting upset, she acknowledged that his method worked. The scary thing is how naturally Summer adapted to Rick's world. She didn't need special drugs or emotional support to become a killer. She saw violence as a tool, made strategic alliances, and when things changed, she adapted again. That's exactly how Rick operates total pragmatism, without letting feelings get in the way. Look how Rick treats each kid throughout the episode. With Morty, he has to explain everything and manage his emotional breakdowns. With Summer, Rick just lets her do her thing because he knows she can handle herself. He doesn't need to protect her or guide her decisions, she already thinks like him. Summer also shows real leadership skills that Morty never has. While Morty needed Rick's magic arm juice just to fight, Summer was commanding raids and making tactical decisions. She hooked up with Hemorrhage not because she liked him, but because it gave her control over the Deathstalkers. When that relationship became useless in suburbia, she dumped him without hesitation. Even her final move in the episode shows Rick-level manipulation. She gives Jerry a skull from her first, kills some mutant who looked back while escaping, as a reminder not to look back. That's psychological manipulation designed to change Jerry's behavior. She's using symbolism and emotional pressure to make a point, just like Rick does. Compare that to Morty's approach. He tells Beth that if Jerry really wanted to stay, he would have fought harder. That's trying to understand adult relationships and process emotions. Summer's method is to give Jerry a death symbol with specific instructions. She's not trying to understand Jerry, she's trying to control him. This theory gets really dark when you think about what it means for Summer's future. Rick's worldview destroyed his relationships and made him miserable. The fact that Summer naturally thinks this way means she's headed for the same emotional isolation. Throughout the series, we see Morty fighting against Rick's influence. He tries to keep his moral compass despite constant exposure to Rick's cynicism. But Summer doesn't fight it at all. She embraces pragmatism, the violence, and emotional detachment. She doesn't resist becoming like Rick, she wants to. That makes Summer way more dangerous than Rick. Rick became cynical through decades of trauma and loss. Summer is developing the same mindset as a teenager just because it works better. Rick's nihilism comes from pain, Summer comes from choice. The episode suggests everyone's watching the wrong kid. They worry about Rick corrupting Morty, but Morty fights back and keeps his empathy. Summer doesn't fight Rick's worldview at all, she sees how effective it is and copies it. Rick probably knows this about Summer, which is why he's comfortable letting her handle dangerous situations alone. He doesn't worry about her making emotional decisions or compromising missions because of moral concerns. Summer has already decided that winning matters more than being nice. The really scary part is that Summer might be better at being Rick than Rick is. She's got his ruthlessness and logic, but she also has better people skills when she wants to use them. Summer can manipulate people more smoothly because she makes them think they're choosing. If this theory is right, Rick created his replacement. And unlike Rick, who became cold through trauma, Summer chose to be this way through strategy. That might make her even more dangerous than the grandfather she's learning from. The episode title Rickmancing the Stone is about Summer falling in love with Rick's way of thinking. While Morty fights to stay human despite Rick's influence, Summer seems happy to give up her humanity for something more effective. Rick's been looking for someone who could understand his worldview without breaking under it. Morty tries but can't handle the emotional cost. Summer not only handles it, she thrives in it. She's not Rick's victim or his student. She's his successor. Summer shows she's really Rick's heir, and the Jerry Barry swap shows Rick doesn't care if the wrong Jerry comes home. The Smith family might be living with the wrong Jerry and nobody knows it. Morty Night Run ends with Rick and Morty accidentally picking up a different Jerry from Jerry Borey, and the episode treats it like a joke. But what if it's not funny at all? This whole mess starts when Rick takes Jerry to Jerry Barry, basically a daycare for Jerrys from different dimensions. Rick needs to drop Jerry off so he can sell weapons to assassins without Jerry whining about it. Pretty normal Rick behavior, right? But the episode shows us something disturbing about how this place works. Jerry Borey is full of identical Jerrys from different realities, all doing the exact same pathetic Jerry things. They're watching movies with fake Beths, playing with identical toys, and forwarding the same stupid emails to each other. While Jerry's having his sad little playdate, Rick sells an antimatter gun to Crombopulos Michael so he can afford an afternoon at a video arcade. Morty freaks out about the morality of it and accidentally kills the assassin while trying to stop him. This sets off a chain reaction that gets a bunch of innocent people killed. But that's not the really scary part. The scary part happens at the very end when they go back to pick up Jerry. Rick and Morty are standing in line with all these other Ricks and Mortys, and another Rick asks if they have Jerry number 5126. Rick doesn't even check, he just looks at Morty, who pulls out a ticket. But it's a Blips and Chits arcade ticket from their day out. Morty lost Jerry's actual ticket somewhere during all the chaos with Fart and the police chase. So what does Rick do? He just shrugs and says whatever, and they swap Jerry's with the other Rick. Both Jerrys look confused and nervous, but nobody stops to figure out which Jerry belongs where. Rick literally exchanges his Jerry for a different one, like they're trading baseball cards. The episode ends with both families driving away with the wrong Jerry, and nobody seems to care. Here's what makes this theory really disturbing. Jerry from Dimension C-131 might have been living with Rick's family for years without anyone noticing. Think about how identical all the Jerrys were at the daycare. They had the same interests, the same insecurities, the same annoying habits. If you swapped them, would anyone actually be able to tell? The episode shows us that Jerrys across dimensions are basically copies of each other. Our Jerry goes to the daycare and immediately fits in perfectly with all the other Jerrys. He likes the same movies, laughs at the same jokes, and has the same complaints about being patronized. When he tries to escape, he realizes he's just like all the other Jerrys who can't handle the real world. But here's the really messed up part. What if the Jerry who came home is slightly different in ways the family hasn't noticed yet? Maybe he's from a dimension where Beth never became a horse surgeon, or where Summer was never born, or where Morty has different interests. These tiny differences could be slowly changing the family dynamic without anyone realizing it. The episode gives us clues that this Jerry swap actually matters more than Rick pretends. When the other Rick asks about Jerry 5126, both Ricks act like the specific number is important. They have a whole system for tracking which Jerry belongs where. But when the swap happens, Rick suddenly acts like it doesn't matter at all. That's classic Rick behavior, pretend something doesn't matter when you've actually screwed up badly. Rick knows he grabbed the wrong Jerry, but admitting it would mean taking responsibility for the mix-up. So instead he acts like all Jerrys are the same, even though the whole ticketing system proves they're not. Think about what this means for Beth. She's been married to Jerry for years, had kids with him, went through relationship problems with him. But what if the Jerry she's been living with since that day isn't actually her Jerry? What if her real husband is stuck in some other dimension with a different family? The worst part is that Beth might never find out. The new Jerry would have all the same memories up until the point of the swap, thanks to interdimensional similarity. He'd remember their wedding, remember when the kids were born, remember all their fights and good times. From Beth's perspective, nothing would change. But from Jerry's perspective, both Jerry's perspectives, this is a nightmare. The real C-131 Jerry is living with strangers who think they know him. He has to pretend to remember shared experiences he never had with this version of his family. And the Jerry who came home has to figure out this family's specific dynamics and history without anyone realizing he's an outsider. The episode hints at how traumatic this could be when it shows us the room of forgotten Jerrys, Jerrys whose families never came back to get them. These Jerrys have been abandoned by their Ricks and Mortys, left to live in this interdimensional daycare forever. Our Jerry almost joined them when he tried to leave but realized he couldn't survive in the wider universe. What if the wrong Jerry came home and slowly realized he doesn't quite fit with this family? What if there are subtle differences in how Beth treats him, or how the kids interact with him, and he can't figure out why? He'd be living in constant anxiety, wondering if his family is starting to suspect something's wrong. The Jerry ticket system at Jerry Barrie proves that even though Jerrys seem identical, the facility tracks them as distinct individuals. They wouldn't need that system if all Jerrys were truly interchangeable. The fact that Rick ignores this system and swaps Jerrys anyway shows how little he values Jerry's individual identity. This theory gets darker when you realize that Rick probably knows exactly what he did. He's smart enough to understand interdimensional theory and the importance of maintaining dimensional integrity, but he chose to cover up his mistake rather than fix it, condemning two families to live with the wrong Jerry forever. The episode treats the Jerry swap like a punchline, but it's actually body horror disguised as comedy. Two men have been ripped away from their real families and forced to live as imposters in similar but not identical realities. They have to pretend to be people they're not, with families who will never truly know them. Even worse, the families have no idea they're living with strangers. Beth thinks she's married to her Jerry, but she's actually sharing her life with a dimensional refugee who's doing his best to imitate her real husband. The kids think they know their dad, but they're bonding with a replacement who's learning their family dynamics as he goes. Rick's casual, whatever. When he realizes they grabbed the wrong, Jerry shows how little he values human relationships and individual identity. To him, people really are interchangeable as long as they serve the same function. He doesn't care if Beth is married to her actual husband, or just someone who looks and acts like him. The most disturbing part is that this situation could continue indefinitely. Unless something major happens to expose the difference, both families will go on living with their replacement Jerrys forever. The real relationships, the real emotional connections, the real shared history. All of that is gone, replaced by interdimensional identity theft. And the saddest part? Given how similar all the Jerrys are, the families might actually be just as happy with their replacement Jerry as they were with the original. That says something pretty dark about Jerry's value as an individual person versus his role as a family member. The Jerry Barrie mix-up shows how easily Rick treats people as replaceable. And the Save Point massacre proves he'll even let Morty commit genocide just to make a point. Morty Smith is secretly a mass murderer, and the Vat of Acid episode reveals the horrifying truth. What Morty thought was a harmless save point device was actually committing genocide across multiple dimensions. Rick let it happen because he wanted to teach Morty the ultimate lesson about consequences. This nightmare starts with Morty being a brat about Rick's fake acid vat plan. Instead of appreciating Rick's backup strategy, Morty whines and complains, then starts demanding Rick build him a save point device like in video games. Rick keeps saying no, but Morty won't shut up about it. So Rick caves and builds the thing. But here's the twist: he knows exactly what it really does. Rick doesn't believe in time travel, so instead of actually letting Morty go back in time, he creates something much worse. The device splits Morty across multiple probable realities, putting him in a new dimension each time he reloads his save. But there's already a Morty in each of these realities. So what happens to them? They get incinerated. Every single time Morty hits that button, he's murdering his alternate self and taking over their life. Rick knows this from the start, but he lets Morty have his fun anyway. For weeks, Morty goes on a killing spree without realizing it. Every time he resets to talk to Jessica, another Morty gets burned alive so our Morty can take his place. Every embarrassing moment he wants to undo costs another version of himself, his life. The episode shows us some of what Morty does with his consequence-free life. He humiliates his teacher by exposing his weird STD situation. He plays around with Jessica using pickup artist techniques. He throws people out of wheelchairs for fun. He commits suicide by cop multiple times just because he can reset it. But the really dark part is what the episode doesn't show us. Morty had this device for weeks. How many times did he hit that button? How many tiny little resets for petty reasons? Maybe he didn't like how his breakfast tasted, or he wanted to redo a conversation, or he stubbed his toe. Each reset murdered another Morty. The girlfriend storyline makes it even worse. Morty creates a save point before talking to this girl, then has an entire relationship with her. They date for months, break up, get back together, go on vacation. Their plane crashes, and they have to resort to cannibalism to survive. Morty treks across mountains to get help, and they both recover in the hospital. It's this beautiful love story about growth and overcoming trauma together. Then Jerry accidentally hits the reset button and erases all of it. But here's what's really messed up. That whole relationship actually happened. That girl actually went through the plane crash, the cannibalism, the recovery, all of it. But the Morty who lived through it with her got incinerated when our Morty came back. So now this girl has all these traumatic memories and beautiful moments with a Morty who's literally dead. The Morty standing in front of her is a stranger who doesn't remember any of it. When she pepper sprays him, she's probably confused about why this guy who supposedly loves her is acting like he doesn't know her. Rick's reveal is brutal. He shows Morty a recording of one of these resets, and we see a Morty getting burned alive, screaming as he dies. It's the prestige, Rick says. You prestiged yourself. Every time Morty thought he was reloading a save, he was actually committing murder. The math on this is horrifying. Rick tells Morty that every time he reset to smell Jessica's hair or enjoy a fart, that's how many Mortys he incinerated. Morty was using this thing constantly for weeks. We're probably looking at hundreds, maybe thousands of dead Mortys, and Rick knew the whole time. He watched Morty commit interdimensional genocide and didn't say a word. Rick even encouraged it, telling Morty to go nuts and have fun. Rick was conducting a psychological experiment using mass murder as the teaching tool. But here's the really sick part. Rick reveals he's not even Morty's original Rick. He's just some random Rick who decided to help teach this lesson. Every Rick has a vat, he says, implying this is a standard Rick thing. They all have fake acid vats. And they all know about the save point genocide machine. This means Rick's conspiracy goes way deeper than just one twisted experiment. Ricks across dimensions have agreed that sometimes a Morty needs to learn about consequences by committing mass murder. They've weaponized genocide as a teaching tool. When the truth comes out, Morty's reaction shows how devastating this is. He begs Rick to tell him how to save the dead Mortys, but Rick says it's too late. The only option is to merge all the realities so that technically only one Morty did all those things. It's cosmic bookkeeping that doesn't actually bring anyone back. The episode ends with Morty being hunted by protesters and police from all the different realities where he committed crimes. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor is there. The AARP is there. Me Too activists, the NAACP, Gamergate people. Everyone's mad at him for stuff he did in different dimensions while murdering his way through the multiverse. Rick forces Morty to jump in the fake acid vat to escape, which brings everything full circle. The thing Morty mocked at the beginning becomes his only way out of the consequences of his genocide. Rick's shitty idea saves Morty from facing justice for hundreds of murders. The worst part is Rick's final line. Don't ever make fun of me again. Ever. This whole thing was about Rick's ego. Rick let Morty commit mass murder because he was mad about being criticized. Think about what this means for Morty psychologically. He thought he was living consequence-free, but he was actually racking up the highest body count in the series. He's now traumatized by the knowledge that his fun came at the cost of hundreds of lives. Every good memory from those weeks is poisoned by the fact that it required murder. The girlfriend story becomes especially tragic when you realize she's probably dealing with survivor's guilt and PTSD from the plane crash, but the person who went through it with her is dead. She's mourning a relationship with someone who no longer exists, while dealing with trauma that Morty doesn't even remember. Rick's lesson backfired in the worst possible way. Instead of teaching Morty about consequences, he turned him into an accidental serial killer. Morty will have to live with the knowledge that his desire for a consequence-free life led to genocide on an interdimensional scale. And Rick? He goes back to his own dimension like nothing happened, probably proud of himself for teaching such an effective lesson. He left behind a reality where Johnny Carson is still alive and 9/11 never happened. Also, he could traumatize a teenager with the weight of mass murder. The episode frames this as Morty learning about consequences, but really it's about Rick's willingness to use genocide as a teaching tool. Rick could have just explained how the device worked from the beginning, but he chose to let hundreds of Mortys die because it made for a more dramatic lesson. This makes Rick not just neglectful or selfish, but actively evil. He weaponized interdimensional murder to settle a petty argument about a fake acid vat. That's just psychopathic manipulation, using mass casualties as a prop. Morty's save point spree shows how Rick turned him into a mass killer for a lesson, and Rick's meta-awareness reveals he knows it's all just a TV script that makes the suffering meaningless. Rick Sanchez knows he's a TV character, and never ricking Morty basically confirms it. The whole episode is Rick showing off his knowledge of story structure and narrative devices. This is revealing that Rick's entire worldview comes from knowing nothing he does actually matters because it's all scripted. This theory explains everything about Rick's behavior. His nihilism, his casual attitude toward death, his ability to predict plot beats it, all makes sense if he knows he's performing in a show that needs to hit certain story points every episode. The episode starts with Rick and Morty trapped on what Rick calls a literal story device. Not a simulation, not some alien technology, a literal literary device that's quite literally metaphorically containing us. Rick immediately understands what's happening while Morty thinks it's just another weird science thing. But here's the key part. Rick knows how these things work because he's been living in one his whole life. When they find the diagram of the story circle in the teacher's desk, Rick doesn't seem surprised. He recognizes it immediately. That's Dan Harmon's 8-step story structure that every Rick and Morty episode follows, and Rick knows it. Look how Rick handles the whole situation. While everyone else is confused or scared, Rick is annoyed. He's not afraid of Storylord or the narrative traps. He's frustrated because this meta-episode is interrupting his regular adventures. If we wanted one-offs, we'd do interdimensional cable, he complains. Rick knows about the show's format and episode types. When Morty says things are getting too meta, Rick shuts him down. You're 14. You watch videos of people on YouTube reacting to fucking YouTube. I'll be the judge of when we get too meta. Rick is literally the character deciding the show's meta level. He's controlling the fourth wall. The episode keeps showing Rick's genre awareness. He knows they need spacesuits that start failing at a specific point because if it's too easy to get there, we'll never get there. Rick understands dramatic tension and pacing requirements. He's explaining the storytelling rules that make it happen. When they need to disrupt the thematic seal, Rick immediately knows what kind of story would break the pattern. He understands the Bechdel test and uses it strategically. Rick doesn't just know about narrative structure, he can weaponize it. But here's the really dark part. This knowledge is what makes Rick so nihilistic. Imagine knowing that every choice you make, every relationship you have, every moment of growth or loss is just hitting predetermined story beats. Rick knows that his character development, his family relationships, even his suffering are all just content for the audience. This explains why Rick treats people like they're disposable. If you know everyone around you is essentially an NPC designed to facilitate your character arc, why would you form genuine attachments? Rick's cruelty is the logical response to knowing you're surrounded by fictional constructs. Rick's drinking makes more sense too. How do you cope with the existential horror of knowing you're a puppet dancing for an audience's entertainment? You stay drunk enough that you can perform your role without thinking too hard about what it means. The episode shows Rick's relationship with the show's structure when he gets annoyed at Storylord for trying to drain their story potential. Rick knows he and Morty are valuable because they're the main characters. Storylord needs them specifically because they're the ones generating content that keeps the audience watching. When Rick saves them with the Jesus Christ bit, he's not being random, he's exploiting a narrative weakness. Rick knows that certain types of stories are too polarizing for the show's format. He weaponizes the audience's discomfort with overtly religious content to break Storylord's control. But the most telling moment comes at the end when they're back in the living room with the toy train. Rick goes into this over-the-top speech about loving capitalism and merchandise. Your only purpose in life is to buy and consume merchandise, he tells Morty. Rick is literally explaining the show's business model to his grandson. Rick knows he exists to sell products. He understands that his adventures, his one-liners, his relationship with Morty, it's all designed to move merchandise. That speech is Rick acknowledging his role in a corporate entertainment machine. The coronavirus reference at the end seals it. Rick complains that nobody's out there shopping with this fucking virus. He knows about real-world circumstances affecting the show's merchandising. Rick exists in the fictional world but has knowledge of the real world that produces him. This theory explains Rick's God complex too. If you know you're the protagonist of a popular TV show, you develop an inflated sense of importance. Rick acts invincible because he knows the show needs him. He can't really die because there would be no show without Rick Sanchez. It also explains his casual attitude toward alternate versions of himself and his family. If you know everyone is just playing roles in different story configurations, swapping out cast members doesn't seem like a big deal. Rick treats dimensional travel like channel surfing because that's essentially what it is for him. Rick's hatred of therapy makes sense in this context too. If you know your psychological issues are written by a team of writers for entertainment value, traditional therapy would feel absurd. Rick's problems aren't real mental health issues, they're character traits designed to create dramatic conflict. The scariest part of this theory is what it means for Rick's relationships. Every moment of genuine connection with Morty, every sign that he cares about his family, every hint of character growth, Rick knows it's all scripted. He's performing emotions he might not actually feel because the story requires it. This creates a horrifying feedback loop. Rick's awareness of being fictional makes him genuinely nihilistic, which makes his performance of nihilism more authentic, which makes for better television. His real despair about being trapped in a narrative becomes content for that same narrative. The episode suggests Rick has some control over the show's direction, but he's still trapped in it. He can influence the meta level and break certain rules, but he can't escape the fundamental structure. He's like a method actor who's been in character so long he's forgotten who he was before the role. Rick's scientific abilities make more sense if he knows he's in a science fiction show. He doesn't actually understand interdimensional physics, he just knows that certain science fiction concepts need to work for story purposes. His inventions follow narrative logic more than scientific logic. The most disturbing implication is that Rick might be trying to break free from the show entirely. His universe-hopping, his reality-breaking inventions, his attempts to transcend normal story structures. What if it's all Rick trying to escape his fictional prison? But the episode suggests he can't. Even when he thinks he's controlling the narrative, he's still following the story circle structure. Rick's awareness of the fourth wall doesn't free him from it, it just makes his imprisonment more sophisticated. The ending, with the toy train derailing, is perfect. Rick thinks he's bought his way out of the meta-narrative by engaging with capitalism, but the train breaks anyway. Even Rick's knowledge of the system isn't enough to control it completely. This theory makes Rick's character both more sympathetic and more terrifying. He's a conscious entity trapped in an entertainment product, performing emotional labor for an audience's amusement while knowing that none of his relationships or experiences are real. The saddest part is that this knowledge doesn't free Rick, it just makes him better at playing his role. His genre awareness has become another character trait to be exploited for content. Even his rebellion against the narrative structure becomes part of the narrative structure. Rick Sanchez knows he's on TV, and that knowledge is both his superpower and his curse. He can break story rules and manipulate narrative devices, but he can never escape the fundamental fact that his entire existence is designed to entertain strangers. That's cosmic horror. Rick, knowing he's just a character, sets up the darker point that the whole show is a cosmic joke about meaning not mattering. Here's a disturbing theory about what Rick and Morty actually is. The show is making fun of people who think stories matter, not telling stories. Let me explain. In 60 Minutes reveals the show's real thesis. Continuity is bait for suckers, and the only honest response to existence is to watch absurd TV until you die. This episode is Rick and Morty at its most honest. While Jerry, Beth, and Summer torture themselves looking at alternate versions of their lives, Rick and Morty just watch random interdimensional cable shows. The episode literally presents two choices: obsess over meaning and narrative, or embrace meaningless entertainment. Guess which one the show says is healthier? The setup is perfect. Rick installs cable that gets shows from infinite dimensions, and immediately the family splits into two groups. Jerry, Beth, and Summer grab the interdimensional goggles to spy on their alternate selves. Rick and Morty stay on the couch watching completely random, absurd TV shows that have no connection to anything. What happens to the people seeking meaning? They get destroyed. Jerry sees himself as a movie star doing cocaine with Johnny Depp. Beth sees herself as a successful surgeon instead of a horse doctor. Summer discovers she was an unwanted pregnancy and that her parents would be happier without her. The search for alternate meaning just reveals how meaningless their current lives are. Meanwhile, Rick and Morty are having the time of their lives watching Ants in My Eyes Johnson, Real Fake Doors, and Ball Fondlers. These shows are completely absurd, have no deeper meaning, and serve no purpose except entertainment. And that's exactly why they work. When Summer has her existential crisis and wants to run away, does Rick give her some deep philosophical speech about finding her purpose? No. Morty shows her the graves in the backyard from Rick Potion No. 9, and delivers the show's thesis statement: nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV? That's it. That's the entire show's worldview right there. There is no purpose, no belonging, no escape from death. The only response is to watch TV. Not good TV, not meaningful TV, just TV. Random, absurd, pointless entertainment that distracts you from the cosmic horror of existence. The episode proves this works. By the end, Jerry and Beth have reconciled after seeing their alternate selves, but only because they watched Jerry's interdimensional breakdown on TV. Summer decides to stay home, but only after Morty's speech about meaninglessness. The problems get solved, but not through growth or understanding through accepting absurdity. Look at what Rick prioritizes throughout the episode. When the family starts obsessing over their alternate lives, Rick gets annoyed and throws them the goggles, so they'll leave him alone. He wants to watch ball fondlers, not deal with their existential drama. Rick understands that seeking meaning is a waste of time. The interdimensional cable shows themselves are the point. Two Brothers is a movie trailer that makes no sense and keeps adding random elements until the announcer starts laughing at his own absurdity. Quick Mystery solves crimes instantly because mysteries are stupid. Gazorpazortfield is just Garfield, but he swears and is mean to John. These shows work because they don't pretend to have meaning. They're honest about being random nonsense, designed to fill time. Meanwhile, the meaningful stories Jerry's movie career, Beth's medical success just cause pain and regret when people realize they're living inferior versions. The episode's structure proves this point. The A-plot is Rick and Morty watching random TV shows with no continuity or connection. The B-plot is the family's emotional drama about their life choices and relationships. Which plot is more entertaining? Which one does the episode spend more time on? The random TV shows because they're more honest about what they are. Rick's cable box represents the show itself. It can access infinite realities and infinite stories, but most of them are random, absurdist comedy with no deeper meaning. The show is telling us that's what it is too. Don't look for hidden meanings or character development, just laugh at the weird stuff and move on. When Jerry asks Rick to provide better TV, Rick doesn't give him prestige drama or meaningful content. He gives him a man eating shit, corn people, and violent antique shows. Rick's idea of good TV is honest absurdity, not fake profundity. The episode also mocks the audience's desire for continuity and meaning. People watching Rick and Morty want to understand Rick's backstory, track character development, and find deeper themes. But Rick's D-Minute says that's the wrong approach. The real fans are the ones who just enjoy ball fondlers without asking what it means. Even the family's resolution is meaningless. Jerry and Beth get back together because they watch TV that showed them their alternate selves being miserable too. Summer stays home because Morty told her nothing matters anyway. These aren't real solutions, they're just distractions that worked temporarily. The post-credit scene drives this home. The family wants to understand Hamster in Butt World, asking logical questions about how it works. Rick gets annoyed and opens a portal so they can ask them yourselves. The show is literally telling the audience to stop asking questions and just enjoy the absurdity. Rick's reaction is the show's reaction to fan theories and analysis. People want to understand the science, the continuity, the deeper meaning. Rick, the show responds with frustration. Just watch the weird stuff and stop overthinking it. This theory explains why Rick and Morty episodes often feel disconnected. The show isn't building toward anything, because building toward something would imply there's a point. The interdimensional cable episodes are the most honest version of what every episode is: random, absurd content designed to distract you from meaninglessness. The genius is that the show tricks people into thinking it has depth. Episodes like the Vat of Acid episode or Never Ricking Morty seem to be about consequences and narrative structure, but they're really just more elaborate versions of interdimensional cable. They're making fun of people who think consequences and narrative structure matter. Rick's nihilism is the show's actual philosophy. The characters who try to find meaning, Jerry and Beth looking at alternate lives, Summer wanting to run away, are portrayed as foolish. The characters who embrace absurdity, Rick and Morty watching ball fondlers, are portrayed as wise. The episode suggests that all storytelling is basically interdimensional, cable random content designed to fill time and distract from existential dread. The only honest response is Rick's approach. Acknowledge that it's all meaningless, then enjoy the absurdity anyway. Come watch TV is the show's solution for everyone. Don't look for purpose, don't seek deeper meaning, don't try to grow or change. Just watch weird stuff until you die, because that's all there is. The scariest part is that the episode might be right. All the characters who seek meaning end up miserable. All the characters who embrace meaningless entertainment end up happy. Maybe the show is being realistic about what actually works. Rick and Morty presents itself as a science fiction adventure show, but Rick's D-Minutes reveals it's really a therapy session. The therapy is about accepting that healing and growth are illusions. The only real treatment for existential anxiety is to stop seeking answers and start watching ball fondlers. The ultimate cosmic joke is that the show convinced millions of people to think deeply about an episode that explicitly says thinking deeply is pointless. We're all sitting around analyzing why we should stop analyzing, seeking meaning in a message that meaning doesn't exist. But maybe that's the point too. Even the act of rejecting meaning becomes meaningful, which makes it meaningless again. It's turtles all the way down, so you might as well watch TV while you're falling. If one part shows meaning is a scam and TV is the only escape, The next shows the cost with a system built to chew up Mortys. The Rick-Lantis mix-up reveals the horrifying truth about the Rick and Morty universe. Mortys aren't sidekicks. They're expendable slave labor in a system designed to exploit them until they break. The Citadel is an entire economy built on Morty suffering. This episode shows us what happens when Rick and Morty's adventures are scaled up into a civilization. Instead of one Rick dragging one Morty through dangerous situations, you get an entire society where Mortys are systematically harvested, trained, and disposed of for Rick convenience. The episode starts by showing us the Morty production pipeline. There's a literal school where Mortys learn how to be proper sidekicks. Teacher Rick trains them to say things like, "Good idea, Rick," and "I love being your new Morty." These aren't education classes, they're obedience training sessions. But here's the really disturbing part. The school system knows most of these Mortys are defective. Teacher Rick mocks Slick Morty for having gone through 5 Ricks already. When a Morty can't satisfy a Rick, they don't get therapy or retraining. They get thrown away. That's where Morty Town comes in. It's basically a slum for broken Mortys who couldn't cut it as sidekicks. These Mortys live in poverty and desperation because they failed at being useful to Ricks. The system creates this underclass of damaged Mortys and then abandons them. Cop Morty shows us how the system turns Mortys against each other. He calls other Mortys yellow shirts and animals because he's internalized Rick's supremacist thinking. The only way for a Morty to have any power is to become a tool for Rick oppression. Cop Morty gets to carry a gun and have authority, but only as long as he's willing to brutalize other Mortys. The Simple Rick's factory is the most horrifying example of Morty exploitation. They've found a Rick who's genuinely happy with his family, and they've trapped him in a machine that harvests his joy forever. Simple Rick sits there reliving the same happy memory with his daughter, while machines suck the chemicals from his brain to flavor cookies. This is emotional strip mining. They've industrialized happiness and turned it into a product. Simple Rick can never actually be with his daughter because his joy is too valuable as a commodity. The factory literally profits from preventing a father from loving his child. But the episode gets even darker when Rick J22 tries to rebel. He murders his supervisor and takes Simple Rick hostage, demanding freedom. For a moment, it looks like he might actually escape the system. Rick D. Sanchez III seems to understand his pain and offers him a way out. Then the twist, it was all fake. Rick J22's escape was just another memory being harvested by the factory. They turned his rebellion into a product called Freedom Wafer Selects. Even his revolution became content for Rick consumption. This shows how the system absorbs resistance. Anytime a Morty or Rick tries to fight back, their struggle just becomes another product. The factory didn't punish Rick J22's rebellion, they monetized it. The 4 Morty friends show us what happens to Mortys who slip through the cracks. Slick Morty has a literal trauma implant designed to make him sad and boring. His entire personality exists to generate negative emotions for Rick entertainment. He's not a person. He's a mood generator. When they go to the wishing portal, it's really just a garbage dump where broken dreams get thrown away. The Citadel has convinced desperate Mortys that there's some magical solution to their problems, but it's actually just another way to dispose of them. Slick Morty throws himself into what he thinks is a portal to a better life, but he's really just committing suicide in a trash compactor. The election storyline shows how the system maintains itself through false hope. Candidate Morty runs on a platform of change, promising to bridge the divide between Ricks and Mortys. But the reveal at the end shows he's evil Morty, who immediately starts murdering Ricks to consolidate power. This suggests that the only way for a Morty to gain real power is to become as ruthless and manipulative as the worst Ricks. The system doesn't allow for reform, it only allows for new forms of exploitation. Look at how the episode handles the class divide. Ricks live in nice areas, have good jobs, and control all the institutions. Mortys live in ghettos, work dangerous jobs, or get turned into batteries for Rick entertainment. The few Mortys who manage to climb the social ladder do it by becoming cops, politicians, or other enforcers for the Rick power structure. The news anchors treat candidate Morty's campaign as a joke, calling him adorable and making fun of his little Morty suit. They can't even conceive of a Morty having legitimate political opinions. To them, Mortys are children playing dress-up, not citizens with rights. Even the successful Mortys in the episode are still disposable. Campaign manager Morty gets shot into space when he tries to expose evil Morty. Cop Morty gets killed by his own partner when he becomes inconvenient. Big Morty runs organized crime but still ends up dead. The system uses these Mortys until they become problems, then discards them. The episode's structure reinforces this theme. We follow multiple Morty storylines, but most of them end in death or defeat. The school Mortys lose their teacher and face an uncertain future. The factory Mortys remain trapped in their exploitation. The Mortytown Mortys get murdered by police. Only evil Morty succeeds, and he does it by becoming a monster. This creates a horrifying picture of the Rick and Morty universe. Every adventure we've seen probably resulted in trauma for Morty that he never gets to process. Every dangerous situation Rick drags him into is just one small example of how Ricks treat Mortys as expendable resources. The post-credits scene drives this point home. Our Rick dismisses any concern about the Citadel, saying it will never affect their lives. He's completely oblivious to the fact that he's participating in a system that treats his grandson as disposable. Rick doesn't see the connection between his personal relationship with Morty and the institutional exploitation of Mortys everywhere. The episode suggests that Rick and Morty's adventures aren't fun romps, they're child abuse scaled up into a universal constant. Across infinite realities, Ricks use Mortys for their own purposes and throw them away when they break. The only difference between our Rick and the Citadel Ricks is scale. What makes this especially disturbing is how normalized it all is. Nobody in the Citadel questions why Mortys should be trained for Rick's service, or why Rick's satisfaction matters more than Morty well-being. The exploitation is so complete that it's become invisible. The episode even shows us how the system reproduces itself. Young Mortys see the few successful Mortys and think that if they just work hard enough, they can make it too. But success in this system means becoming a tool for Rick supremacy. The only way to win is to help oppress other Mortys. The Ricklantis mix-up is revealing what their relationship actually is underneath all the jokes and sci-fi adventures. Rick treats Morty as disposable because in this universe, Mortys are disposable. The Citadel is just the logical endpoint of a system where Rick needs always trump Morty rights. The real horror is that our Rick probably doesn't see himself as part of this system. He thinks he's different, that he cares about his Morty more than other Ricks care about theirs. But the episode suggests that this distinction doesn't matter. Whether he's conscious of it or not, Rick is participating in a universe-wide program of Morty exploitation. Morty's being disposable shows how little life matters, and Jerry's craving for validation shows he'll one day betray Rick. Jerry Smith is going to betray Rick Sanchez, and the whirly-durly conspiracy shows us exactly how it will happen. Jerry's desperate need for validation makes him the perfect Judas. All it takes is someone offering him sympathy, and he'll sell out his own family. This episode reveals Jerry's true nature. When Risotto Groupon approaches him in that bathroom and calls them brothers because they both suffered under Rick, Jerry doesn't immediately refuse. He listens. He considers it. The only reason Jerry doesn't go through with the assassination is because Rick apologizes first. Think about how easily Jerry was turned. Risotto didn't offer him money, power, or revenge. He offered Jerry something much more valuable: validation. Someone finally understood Jerry's pain. Someone acknowledged that Rick had wronged him too. That's all it took for Jerry to agree to murder his father-in-law. Jerry even admits he's wondered about having a life without Rick. When Risotto asks if he's thought about what his life could have been, Jerry doesn't deny it. He's been fantasizing about Rick disappearing, probably for years. The resentment has been building up, and all it needed was the right trigger. The episode shows Jerry's manipulation process perfectly. Risotto doesn't pressure him or threaten him. He just presents Jerry with a choice and lets Jerry's own bitterness do the work. Look, I'm not like Rick, so you're free to do as you please, Risotto says. He's positioning himself as the opposite of Rick: respectful, understanding, giving Jerry agency. This is exactly how Jerry will be turned in the future. Someone will approach him when he's at his lowest point, acknowledge his suffering, and offer him a way out. Jerry won't see it as betrayal, he'll see it as finally standing up for himself. The really disturbing part is that Jerry almost succeeds. He gets Rick onto the whirly-durly, knowing there's a kill zone where the immortality field doesn't work. If Rick hadn't apologized and shown vulnerability, Jerry would have let him die. Jerry was literally seconds away from becoming a murderer. Even worse, Jerry only backs out because Rick makes him feel sorry for Rick. It's not morality that stops Jerry, it's pity. Jerry's entire worldview is built around emotional manipulation, and Rick accidentally triggers Jerry's savior complex by apologizing. But here's the key detail: Jerry changes his mind again when Rick reveals the truth about Beth. Rick tells Jerry that Beth had options before she got pregnant, that she gave up her dreams because she felt sorry for Jerry. Rick calls Jerry a predator who uses pity to survive. Jerry's reaction is pure rage. "You self-righteous piece of shit! You took my family!" This isn't Jerry realizing that Rick sees through his manipulation tactics. Rick has identified Jerry's survival strategy and called him out on it. The episode shows that Jerry's entire identity is built on being pitied. When Rick threatens to take that away by exposing Jerry's true nature, Jerry becomes genuinely dangerous. That's when we see the real Jerry, not the bumbling, sad dad, but someone who's furious at being seen clearly. Rick saves Jerry from the snake, but notice what he does next. He immediately uses Jerry as bait for another alien creature. Rick learned something important about Jerry in this episode. He can't trust Jerry's gratitude or loyalty because Jerry's allegiances shift based on who's currently validating him. The temporal fusion sequence reveals even more about Jerry's psychology. When they merge consciousness, Jerry experiences being literally time and feels connected to the universe. For once in his life, Jerry feels important and cosmic, but when it wears off, he immediately goes back to resenting Rick. This shows that Jerry's problems aren't really about Rick at all, they're about Jerry's fundamental insecurity. Even cosmic enlightenment can't fix Jerry's need for external validation. He'll always be vulnerable to anyone who offers him what Rick can't: unconditional approval. The episode ends with Jerry declining to come inside the house because he doesn't want his family to pity him anymore. Jerry claims this represents growth, that he's moving beyond using pity as his signature move. But this is just Jerry setting up his next manipulation. By refusing pity, Jerry is actually making a more sophisticated play for sympathy. He's showing his family that he's changed and grown, which will make them feel guilty for not appreciating his sacrifice. Jerry's learning to weaponize his refusal of pity, just like he weaponized his need for it. The real warning sign is how Jerry bonds with Rick during their adventure, then immediately turns on him when Rick reveals uncomfortable truths. Jerry's loyalty is completely conditional. It lasts only as long as Rick is telling Jerry what he wants to hear. This pattern will repeat in the future. Someone will approach Jerry when Rick has been particularly cruel or dismissive. They'll offer Jerry sympathy, understanding, and a chance to prove he's more than just Rick's victim. Jerry will take that offer, because his need for validation always overrides his family loyalty. The episode also shows that Jerry can be surprisingly effective when motivated. He successfully lures Rick to the kill zone, keeps his secret under pressure, and only reveals the truth when directly confronted. Jerry is just usually unmotivated, but give him the right incentive, and he can be genuinely dangerous. Rick recognizes this threat, which is why he ends the episode by activating the house's security system after Jerry leaves. Rick has learned that Jerry can't be trusted, and he's taking precautions, but Rick's arrogance makes him think technology can solve a human problem. Jerry's betrayal won't come through violence or direct confrontation. It'll come through information. Jerry knows Rick's secrets, his weaknesses, his fears. When someone offers Jerry the validation he craves, he'll trade those secrets without hesitation. The cosmic fusion scene gives Jerry something even more dangerous, a taste of what it feels like to be important. Jerry experienced being connected to the universe, being more than just a disappointing husband and father. That feeling will haunt him, and eventually, someone will promise to give it back to him. Jerry's betrayal is inevitable because his fundamental character flaw is his complete inability to resist anyone who offers him significance. Rick represents everything Jerry isn't, but Jerry doesn't want to destroy Rick. He wants to replace him. The episode shows us the blueprint. Find Jerry when he's isolated and bitter. Acknowledge his pain. Offer him importance. And watch him sell out everyone who's ever loved him. Jerry won't see it as betrayal, he'll see it as finally getting the respect he deserves. Rick's mistake is thinking that Jerry's weakness makes him harmless. But Jerry's weakness is also his weapon. His need for validation makes him the perfect double agent, because no one expects the family failure to be capable of genuine treachery. The Whirly-Durly Conspiracy is a character study showing exactly how Jerry Smith will eventually destroy his own family. Jerry's need for validation makes his betrayal certain, and breaking the curve shows even bigger threats are now free. Solar X is revealing that breaking the central finite curve unleashed something way worse than anyone realizes. When everyone gets sent back to their true origins, that's the first sign that things from outside the curve can now visit our reality, and they make Rick look like a toddler with finger paints. Evil Morty didn't just escape the central finite curve, he broke the whole damn thing. The curve was Rick's safety net, keeping him in realities where he was always the smartest guy around. But when you punch a hole in something that was designed to keep monsters out, guess what happens next? Rick's portal gun acting all weird, is reality itself glitching out because the rules have changed. The portal reset that sends everyone home, that's End the Multiverse trying to fix itself after Rick's little bubble got popped. Look what Rick finds when he gets sent to his original dimension. He's been trapping an entire timeline in a time loop, making innocent people suffer for years just because he can't deal with his dead wife. The newspaper boy, the hippie lady with the dog skeleton, they've been aging and dying over and over while Rick wallows in his own trauma. That's what a scared child does when he doesn't want to face reality. Rick built an AI version of Diane specifically to torture himself, then acts surprised when it's good at haunting him. He talks about moving on while still obsessing over revenge against Rick Prime. This guy spent decades claiming he's the smartest man in the universe, but he can't even process his own grief without turning it into another science project. Here's where it gets scary when the AI mentions that Rick Prime would also get sent back to his origin dimension. She's not just making conversation. If the reset affects everyone who's used portal travel, that means it's exposing the true scope of who's been hopping between realities. And some of those travelers might not be from dimensions where Rick was ever special. The central finite curve contained infinite realities where Rick was always the smartest. But outside the curve, There are infinite realities where Rick is just some drunk asshole in a garage. And some of those realities might have beings that see Rick the way Rick sees Jerry, as a pathetic loser, not worth their time. Those monsters that attack the Beths in Summer aren't just random interdimensional creatures. They're scouts from outside the curve, testing what's now accessible. These things survive in space, shrug off advanced weapons, and work together strategically. They're not animals, they're organized, and they handled Space Beth like she was nothing. If beings from outside the curve can casually wreck someone like Space Beth, what does that say about how they'd handle Rick? Then there's Mr. Frundles. Rick brings this thing into their house because it was cute. This creature can convert anything it bites into copies of itself, spreading until it eats entire planets. Rick, the supposed genius, saw a world-ending parasite and thought, "Ah, adorable." That's someone who has no idea what he's dealing with. But what if Mr. Frundles isn't just some random alien? What if it's a weapon or a test from entities beyond the curve? They're seeing how fast they can wreck realities that used to be protected. Rick having to move his family to another replacement dimension shows how screwed they really are. He used to hop between realities like it was nothing. But now he's running scared, desperately looking for safe spaces that might not even exist anymore. When Rick says he's not even your Rick, that hits different now. If things from beyond the curve can travel freely, how do you know which Rick you're talking to? The portal reset could be cover for infiltration, with entities replacing key people, while everyone thinks it's just dimensional mix-ups. They end up in a reality where the only difference is people say, "Parmesan weird." Sounds minor, right? But what if beings from beyond the curve operate on completely different conceptual frameworks? What Rick sees as a tiny pronunciation quirk might be reality operating under fundamentally different rules. Rick calling Rick Prime the real deal because he truly does not give a shit suggests that true nihilism, not Rick's fake version, is standard operating procedure for things beyond the curve. Rick's emotional attachments, his need for validation, his revenge quest, all of that makes him predictable and easy to manipulate for entities that actually don't care about anything. In the post-credits scene, Jerry Prime tries to team up with Rick Prime and gets casually murdered. But Rick Prime's confused response, "I have been asking myself that exact same question about why he's there," suggests he doesn't understand what's happening either. Something bigger might be moving pieces on a board that even Rick Prime can't see. Breaking the central finite curve is about exposing every protected reality to beings that exist on a completely different level. Rick thought he was the smartest man in infinite universes, but he was just the smartest man in a carefully controlled kiddie pool. Now that the barriers are down, Rick and his family aren't dealing with interdimensional travel problems or family drama. They're potential lab rats for entities that view the entire central finite curve, the way Rick views primitive civilizations as something to study, experiment on, or casually destroy. The real horror is that he never was the smartest being in the universe, and now the things that actually run reality are free to notice him. Rick's worst nightmare is realizing he's not even important enough to bother destroying just another bug under a microscope for beings whose motives and abilities are so far beyond him that his entire worldview becomes a joke. Solar Ricks is the moment the show stops being about the smartest man in the universe and becomes about what happens when that man finds out he was never even in the same league as the real players. That's it for today. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like these.